Chapter 401. She suddenly could not continue the words in her mouth. His face was extremely pale. Although his face was still young, his expression was extremely tired, like a person whose vitality had been sucked out and could die at any time. Even the color of his hair had turned gray. Compared to the extraordinarily handsome and spirited him from before, this was simply tragic to the point of tears and heartache. Wei Weibai felt that she might break her character setting because she saw him so miserable. She felt that if she continued to torture him, she would not be able to get past her conscience. Forget it, go down. Wei Weibai let go of her hand and let him leave with a look of disdain. It seemed that she did not even have the heart to torture and take revenge on him. Ning Yishu held the towel and was stunned for a moment before he said softly, "Master, let me stay." Wei Weibai looked at his haggard face that had lost its vitality and could not say anything vicious. The dignified male lead of a refreshing novel had become the main force in a torturing novel with a crippled spirit root. Ning Yishu saw that she was not chasing him away, so he walked over and gave her a towel and prepared her clothes and socks. Wei Weibai felt that she really couldn't put on a vicious persona. Ning Yishu only said after everything was done, "Then I'll go down, master." Wei Weibai could not say anything after telling him to get lost. After Ning Yishu left, Wei Weibai looked at her 85 favorability with a haggard face. "This is the first time I don't want to torture someone." Ning Yishu looked miserable and could not torture him. The system said, "He doesn't have a spirit root, but he still has fate. The entire plane's fate is on him, and there is no room for discussion. The awakening of the heavenly soul ate his spirit root, so his fate points will be enhanced by the heavenly soul's spirit root." Wei Weibai looked at the health bar on top of her head and was as steady as Mount Tai. In Ning Yishu's heart, her evil character setting could not be broken. Therefore, she decided not to torture herself. She would happily complete the mission and not make things difficult for herself. Ning Yishu struggled to carry the water bucket. He was now a cripple and didn't have much time left. After all, if his spirit root was completely destroyed, his body would also deteriorate. Suddenly, the bucket slipped out of his hand and he started coughing violently. His body had already collapsed to such an extent that he couldn't even lift a bucket of water. She probably wouldn't like such a piece of trash. Ning Yishu thought that she would kill him as soon as she opened her eyes. Or perhaps, after seeing him like this, he wanted to keep him and slowly torture him to death? Ning Yishu laughed self-deprecatingly. He struggled to stand up straight, but when he looked up, his entire body froze. To his surprise, Wei Weibai was sitting on the wall. Her clothes were as white as snow, and her features were picturesque. Beside her, a cluster of red flowers could not compare to her beauty. She looked at him coldly with an expressionless face. Ning Yishu suddenly lowered his head in embarrassment. No matter how useless he was in the past, he wasn't so weak that he couldn't even lift a bucket of water. When he saw Wei Weibai, his heart actually felt inferior and flustered. Wei Weibai suddenly waved her hand and the wet parts of his body dried up. "You're simply embarrassing me." Ning Yishu pursed his lips and stood up straight, trying his best to bear with her disdain. "My disciple doesn't need to do such menial work." Wei Weibai's words carried a trace of anger, but she didn't reprimand him coldly. Ning Yishu was stunned and looked up in disbelief. He saw Wei Weibai jump down from the wall, turn around and walk away. When she reached the corner, she suddenly turned around and frowned slightly. "What are you standing there for? Follow me." Ning Yishu hesitated for a moment before he staggered to follow her. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 402. Because he was too anxious, he actually sprained his ankle and his entire body was about to fall forward. In the next moment, his entire body fell into a familiar embrace filled with a familiar fragrance. Wei Weibai firmly hugged him. She disdainfully said, "How can you not even walk properly? How can you be my disciple when you're this weak?" Ning Yishu only felt that his nose was filled with her beautiful scent. When he heard her disdain, his heart sank. When he pulled out his own spirit root to save her, he already knew that he would definitely die. Before she woke up, he should have already committed suicide. But when he thought of not being able to see her in his last days, he felt unreconciled. She would definitely be disgusted when she saw a piece of trash like him. Raise your head. Don't shrink back like a little girl. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said. Ning Yishu could only barely stand up straight. When he raised his head, he discovered that the two of them had already returned to her room. Wei Wei Bai pushed him. Go soak in the bath. Ning Yishu saw that there was actually a bathtub made of jade placed in the middle of the room. This bathtub was a very rare magic treasure that could repair damaged bodies. Moreover, the bathwater was filled with all kinds of heavenly treasures. Ning Yishu suddenly hesitated. His unswerving determination and ruthless nature had almost been worn away by her. Wei Wei Bai couldn't bear to see him dilly-dallying. Hurry up and go in. Do you still want me to take off your clothes? Ning Yishu turned his head. His eyes were filled with all kinds of complicated emotions. His tone was still calm. I thought that master wanted to kill me. She thought that he was a vengeful person with a vicious nature. In her eyes, wasn't he an extremely evil person who wanted to force her into a corner? Wei Wei Bai coldly snorted, I really want to kill you. I have never suffered this kind of humiliation before. Ning Yishu said calmly, you can punish me to vent your anger. Bai Wei Wei suddenly flew up, grabbed him, and threw him into the bathwater. The medicine immediately soaked into his body. His shattered meridians and deteriorating body immediately felt a sharp pain. Ning Yishu sucked in a breath of cold air. Bai Wei Wei reached out and pressed down on his head, fiercely pushing him into the water. I'll punish you. You have to bathe me every day. Ning Yishu knew that if these herbs were used on people with spiritual roots, they would have a very good effect. Using it on a cripple like him would at most allow him to maintain his health and extend his lifespan. Compared to the rare and precious medicinal herbs that she had used to extend his life, it was too much of a loss. Ning Yishu, on the other hand, was starting to feel afraid. He was so disappointed that he was in despair. He thought that he could finally greedily stay by her side for a few days and then die peacefully. But how could she break his peaceful state of mind and set off huge waves in his heart again? Ning Yishu suddenly reached out and grabbed her fingers so hard. He suddenly said in a cold voice, Master, what do you mean? Don't give him so much hope. He won't be able to suppress the crazy possessiveness in his heart. Wei Wei Bai suddenly became silent. Her face revealed a trace of suspicious annoyance and shyness. Ning Yishu saw her expression and suspected that there was something wrong with his eyes. She frowned and hesitated for a moment before asking, Is that you? Ning Yishu had a face of doubt, but he saw her thin lips slightly open and her words were clearly heard. A Ning, is that you? In the illusion, she had always called him a Ning. Ning Yishu's body shook as he looked at her in disbelief. His heart actually began to beat faster. Her voice became soft. When you took out your spiritual root to save me, I had a dream. Chapter 403. Dream? Was it their experience together in the illusion? Ning Yishu stood in the potion. The pain of the potion healing his body did not affect him at all. He saw a bronze mirror behind her. His face was gray and his hair was gray. He did not look like he did in the illusion at all. Ning Yishu was just about to turn his face away when a beautiful, white hand firmly gripped his face. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold and pure, reflecting Ning Yishu's face. She emphasized each word and said, I Ning? Ning Yishu felt as if his heart was being pulled out and torn apart. If he hadn't destroyed his spiritual root, he would have been happy to see Bai Wei Wei remember everything that had happened between the two of them in the dreamland. But now he wanted to avoid her so much. In the illusion he was strong enough to protect her, but in reality he was worse than trash. But Wei Wei Bai refused to let him lower his head. She was impatient and reached out to grab his wet clothes. Ning Yishu reacted and grabbed her hand. He looked up at her and said in a complicated tone, Master, Wei Wei Bai said coldly, Are you a Ning? When I was in the secret territory, did I go to the labyrinth of illusions? Did you take me in? Ning Yishu was most afraid that she would know about this, because this meant that she knew that he had wanted to kill her. Wei Wei Bai's fingers slowly moved across his eyebrows, down his cheeks, and gently fell on his lips. Her voice became soft, I had a very long dream. In the dream, you were like an omnipotent master. You grew up with me and protected me. Ning Ishu's body trembled slightly. In the illusion, she was special to him, but he did not dare to think that he could have such a high position in her heart. Wei Wei Bai fell into memory and said softly, "When I was at my worst, you were by my side. When I was in the biggest crisis, you were still by my side. When I was in a mess, you were still by my side." Ning Ishu's expression also became gentle. Bai Weiwei suddenly pinched his chin. "That's why I say you're a jinx. When you're by my side, why am I always unlucky?" Ning Ishu was speechless. Bai Weiwei reached out and pressed him heavily into the water. "So you troublemaker, be obedient and take a bath. Wash off that damn bad luck of yours." Ning Ishu drank several mouthfuls of medicine. The pain was almost unbearable. Suddenly, a gentle and soft spiritual chi flowed through his limbs. The pain disappeared after a while. Bai Weiwei cast a spell and floated in the air. She leaned against the edge of the tub and pressed her hand on his shoulder. She lazily combed his body so that the potion could be better digested in his body. Ning Ishu was pressed into the medicine, and from time to time, he would be pressed down by her to drink a few mouthfuls. He struggled to say, "Master, it's useless. My spiritual root is already ruined and my body is also ruined, so no amount of medicine could make him normal." Wei Wei Bai coldly said, "You are so long-winded." After saying that, she pressed him into the water again. Over and over again, when the medicine was almost completely digested, she lifted him up and threw him out of the door. "Get lost. Come back tomorrow morning to serve me." Ning Ishu sat on the ground. His wet body was dried by her technique. Because of the medicine, his gray hair began to have some luster. His movements were a bit sluggish as he slowly stood up from the ground. His expression seemed to be a bit absent-minded, but his eyes were no longer lifeless. Chapter 404. Wei Wei Bai sat inside the door, casually rocking her little bell-adorned feet. She looked up at him and was dazed for a moment, then immediately looked away. Of course, this action was fleeting. Maybe she felt that avoiding his gaze was cowardly, so she immediately turned back to glare at him. The heavy sadness in Ning Ishu's heart dissipated. It was as if he had returned to the fantasy world. She always treated him with a special intimacy. Even if this intimacy had nothing to do with love, it was enough for him. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 90. Congratulations to the host for completing the character preservation mission. Please continue to maintain the canon fodder plot. This was the most difficult role-playing mission in history, and he had successfully completed it. Wei Wei Bai and the system both let out a sigh of relief. In the end, their family survived. As for the rest of the plot, she just had to do it half-heartedly. Wei Wei Bai looked up, and her character's HP bar began to collapse. Finally, it disappeared into thin air. The system said, with the remaining 10 favorability points, you don't have to torture the male lead to death to maintain your character anymore. After all, the male lead, who had been going on a killing spree all the way to the end except for a good-for-nothing start, had been abruptly tortured into a pitiful, bitter cabbage. The system felt that the male lead must have taken the wrong script. Wei Wei Bai was mentally and physically exhausted. If it wasn't for this stupid mission, would she have been tormented for so long? Tormenting people was very tiring. The next day, Ning Ishu respectfully served her with a wash basin. Wei Wei Bai had already searched for all the useful treasures in Grand Heaven's Mountain overnight. It was enough for him to bathe for half a year. Ning Ishu was once again thrown into the bathtub by Wei Wei Bai. He seemed to have given up struggling and his eyes were dull. The potion's power entered his body again. His long hair was dripping wet, and his naked body was faintly discernible in the potion. Wei Wei Bai reached out and put her hand on his shoulder, using her own spiritual energy to comb his meridians. Suddenly, Ning Ishu's hoarse voice rang out. "Master, have you heard of an alchemy method?" Wei Wei Bai coldly snorted. "What, you still want to be an alchemist?" Ning Ishu turned his head to look at her and found that her eyes were lowered. Her expression was languid, and in the light, she seemed to be glowing. A trace of lively fanaticism finally appeared in his dim and colorless eyes. Master, although my body has lost its spirit root, the power in my body can completely heal your meridians. When he stripped off his spirit root to save her, he already knew how badly her body was damaged, even though he had been using his power to heal her. However, he was not completely healed. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She didn't seem to understand what he wanted to say. Ning Yishu reached out and slowly grasped her fingers. His face was pale and haggard, but there was a strange light in his eyes. Master, take my body and refine it into a pill. Squeeze out all the remaining energy in my body and turn it into a pill to heal you. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Yishu revealed a smile. It was like the final radiance of the setting sun. That kind of handsome demeanor returned to him. I'm going to die anyway. If I can become a pill and become a part of Master's body, it's also good. These words were heavy and incomparably desolate. Wei Wei Bai was just about to refuse when she thought of the plot of refining him into a pill. Wasn't this going to torture him to the end? Sensing her hesitation, Ning Yishu was not surprised. Even if she had a trace of affection for him in her heart, her temperament had always been that of a person who didn't look out for themselves. How could she change for a piece of trash like him? The full article is at https://www. Sashu. Chapter 405. The Great Formation was shaken by countless attacks. The cannon fodder sects in the novel had at least a few hundred people crowding the entrance of Grand Heaven's Mountain. An almighty void refinement cultivator with white hair and a childish face had a cold expression. Wei Wei Bai, you connived with your traitorous disciple to commit murder and kill my disciple. If you don't kill Ning Yishu today, I swear to slaughter your sect. Wei Wei Bai's eyes glazed over for a moment. She asked the system, who's his disciple? The system flipped through the novel settings. It's your good brother, Yuchen. Good brother? Wei Wei Bai shuddered in disgust. Only then did she remember that Ning Yishu destroyed Yu Chen's body and soul. With the small one dead, the big one came out to be the main character's obstacle. Shuang novels were all like this. The small one brought out the big one brought out the old one, and the old one brought out his ancestors. In any case, he had to do his best to go against the main character and persevere to give the main character experience and equipment. This was all a routine. Yu Chen's master suddenly formed a flower with his fingers. The flower condensed from spirit energy kept growing bigger until it could cover the entire Grand Heaven's Mountain. The ancestral protective formation of Grand Heaven's Mountain suddenly shook. Kill Ning Yishu, and I will spare the lives of everyone in Grand Heaven's Mountain. Void refinement cultivators could move the heavens and overturn the seas. They could slaughter thousands of creatures with a raise of their hands. In any case, they were very awesome. Wei Wei Bai felt that her nascent soul cultivator was too pitiful. She was just a small cannon fodder character in the early stages. As soon as she got entangled with Ning Yishu, all sorts of messy late-stage big bosses came out. The main character was indeed a jinx. Whoever was by his side would be unlucky. Wei Wei Bai knew that the great formation of Grand Heaven's Mountain was a protective shield built by generations of ancestors. Even if a void refinement cultivator wanted to break this formation, it would take some time. Thus, she was very assured and walked forward a few steps. Just as she was about to show off, her hand was grabbed by Ning Yishu. Wei Wei Bai looked back strangely and saw him staring deeply at her. Master, let me out. His expression was calm. He didn't look like he was going to die, but more like he was going out for a stroll. He knew that it was impossible for Wei Wei Bai, who was in the nascent soul stage, to defeat those people outside the door. Moreover, he knew very well that she would not go against so many people for him. Because she had such a selfish personality, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of resentment, and even felt relieved. Only with her personality could she protect herself. He could not protect her. He would rather she be selfish, vicious, and arrogant than compromise and accept her fate for anyone else. Wei Wei Bai sneered, "Are you so eager to die?" Ning Yishu didn't show a trace of fear in the face of death, but there was a trace of gentleness in his tone. "If I die, will you remember me?" Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows, her eyes filled with anger. Why would I remember you? If you die, I can get rid of the reputation of taking in a trash disciple. Who will remember you? Ning Yishu's smile stiffened for a moment. He seemed a little sad. He opened his mouth a few times, but in the end he just sighed. Master, then I'll be leaving. A void refinement stage cultivator was too terrifying. With the addition of the people from the big sects outside, Grand Heaven's Mountain didn't have the power to fight. If he didn't cripple his spirit root and had the blood-stained dagger, he could still protect her. But now he was just a trash. After Ning Yishu finished speaking, he walked out without hesitation. His body was much weaker than before. The aftermath of the array hit his body, and every step he took was like scraping his flesh. But his footsteps were incomparably firm. He walked to the edge of the array, paused for a moment, and then slowly stepped out. This step was a parting of life and death. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 406. Yu Chen's master glanced at him indifferently and raised his hand. You killed my disciple, so I'll kill you. An eye for an eye, an eye for an eye. This is a common practice in the cultivation world. The flower in his hand suddenly turned into a ray of white light. The white light was like a sharp blade, ruthlessly stabbing towards the chest of Ning Yishu, who had just stepped out of the formation. Ning Yishu didn't dodge. He just stood there calmly. His weak body was as straight as a pine tree, and his handsome face was serene. Many memories of the past flashed through his mind, and all of them were related to Wei Wei Bai. Her viciousness, her occasional fragility, and the helplessness and pain of being trapped by her past in the illusion realm. Finally, it was her smiling face in the morning light. Idiot, you have to come and find me earlier next time. He wouldn't be able to find her in this life or the next. The consequence of having his body and soul destroyed was that he wouldn't even have the chance to reincarnate. Before he died, Ning Yishu finally dared to call out softly, Wei Wei Bai. Idiot, why are you calling me? A crisp voice rang in his ears. Ning Yishu's eyes suddenly widened. A long dress like fluttering feathers glided across the sky, and a familiar fragrance appeared in his nose. He looked up and saw her stepping on the void, walking with the wind. That white light blade was blocked by her. Ning Yishu felt his heart suddenly jump, and his eyes were bloodshot. A nascent soul cultivator couldn't resist a void refinement cultivator. He would die. Wei Wei Bai forcibly blocked the fatal attack for him, and her entire body fell from the sky. Ning Yishu's heart and soul were torn apart. He chased after her with all his might, and reached out to grab her falling body. The huge gravity made him unable to bear it, and he fell backward. He fell heavily to the ground and endured all the impact. He didn't dare to let Wei Wei Bai in his arms suffer the slightest bit of harm. When the void refinement stage cultivator saw this, his tone finally turned cold. It seems like Grand Heaven's Mountain sect has sworn to protect Ning Yishu. Then I can only slaughter your entire sect. Wei Wei Bai, who was lying in Ning Yishu's arms, raised her head and couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Her lips were dyed red, and her eyes were filled with ruthlessness. For a moment, her face was so gorgeous that it was dazzling. You ugly old bastard. You can't break through to the void refining stage. You're just a piece of trash who doesn't have many years left to live. How dare you come to my Grand Sky Mountain sect and make a ruckus? You're just like that pretentious disciple of yours. Both of you are asking for death, going against the main character. If this wasn't courting death, then what was? After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she waved her finger and a huge array was formed in the air. This was the key to the Grand Mountain Protective Array. The Grand Mountain Protective Array could protect the Grand Heavens Mountain for thousands of years without any changes. But once they attacked, it would be a suicidal attack. Not to mention void refining stage cultivators, even Dashang stage cultivators would have to weigh their own abilities. When that cultivator saw this, his expression finally changed slightly. He waved his hand and used his magic power to protect himself. Then he swept away the elites of his sect. Let's go. We can't stay here for long. Wei Wei Bai formed a seal with her fingers. You want to leave? It's not that easy. Suddenly, the world fell silent. A strange light surged out from the center of the Grand Mountain Protective Array. Wei Wei Bai stood up from Ning Yishu's arms. She stretched out her hand and threw him back into the Grand Mountain Protective Array. Ning Yishu lay on the ground in a sorry state. He raised his head and looked outside the array in a daze. Wei Wei Bai had her back to him. She stood in the dazzling light. Her long dress and black hair fluttered in the wind. She was extremely stunning. Everyone's escape route was covered by the light. The Grand Mountain Protective Array started to attack. All the cultivators who came to attack the Grand Heavens Mountain sect died one after another. Screams rang out one after another. Their lives were taken away by the intense light. Chapter 407. The leading void refinement cultivator gritted his teeth and spat out a mouthful of blood. His vitality was greatly damaged, so he used a forbidden technique to break through space and escape. He roared with a ferocious expression, Wei Wei Bai, I will definitely repay the losses I suffered today. Just wait for me. Wei Wei Bai sneered, her eyes full of arrogance. If you have the guts, don't run, old turtle. After the great array finished attacking the enemy, it gradually quieted down. Wei Wei Bai also turned around and walked back. After a few steps, she finally couldn't take it anymore and spat out a mouthful of blood. The consequence of a nascent soul cultivator forcibly activating the great array was to cause great harm to the caster. In addition, Wei Wei Bai damaged her own meridians to not violate her character setting and get close to Ning Yishu. Now it was one disaster after another. Ning Yishu was lying on the ground, his expression difficult to distinguish whether he was happy or angry. When he saw her spitting out blood and stumbling, the intense emotions in his heart finally burst out. He grabbed the ground with both hands, almost scraping them to the point of bleeding. With an unimaginable speed, he got up and rushed in front of her. Just as she was about to fall, he reached out and hugged her. However, his body was weak to begin with. When he knelt on the ground, he didn't feel any pain at all. He just kept reaching out to wipe the blood from Wei Wei Bai's mouth. Wei Wei Bai coughed a few times before lazily leaning her head on his chest. Why did you save me? He asked as if he was still in a dream. With Wei Wei Bai's character, how could she risk everything to save him? The Great Array could only be attacked once, and the caster had to pay a huge price. Those escaping enemies would come back again. How could she, a nascent soul cultivator, survive? Ning Yishu's mind was full of confused doubts. His eyes reddened and he felt bitter. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be in a trance. I don't know either. The tears in Ning Yishu's eyes finally fell. He gritted his teeth and said fiercely, How can you not know? Do you want to force me to death? She was cold and hot to him, making him crazy and desperate. When he was about to sacrifice himself, this woman abandoned everything to save him. She was so capricious, so vicious and affectionate. She forced him to love her to the point that he couldn't control himself. Bai Weiwei sneered, What's wrong? You're dissatisfied with saving you? Do you want me to apologize to you? Too embarrassed to come and save you? She had to be so vicious even when she was trying to save someone. Ning Yishu couldn't help but laugh. She still had this temperament, but he couldn't stop his tears from flowing. He was crying and laughing, he looked very embarrassed. You really don't save me, he said softly as he picked her up and walked back. He was very greedy. If she gave him a little bit of hope, he would want to be tied to her forever. She had saved him, and he didn't want to let her go for the rest of his life. Wei Wei Bai leaned in his arms and quietly closed her eyes. She quietly communicated with the system. What should I do if he keeps crying? Who said that men don't cry easily? He's crying like a tortured little boy. The system flipped through the original novel and sighed. If I were Ning Yishu, I'd cry worse than him. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. The system said, "You're a good male lead, yet you've survived until now. You don't have any abilities, you don't have any girls, and you don't even have any brothers. Don't you think it's bad?" Wei Wei Bai was speechless. "Don't you still have me?" The system paused for a moment before saying, "With you, wouldn't it be worse?" By Wei Wei. At the crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. Chapter 408. Because she still had to walk the cannon fodder storyline, she worked hard to gain 1 or 2 points of favorability in the following days. She was in a good mood, eating and waiting for death. As for the enemies that were chased away by the mountain protecting array, it would take time for them to come back for revenge. Thus, Wei Wei Bai was very leisurely these 2 months. Ning Yishu quietly accompanied her, concocting medicine for her and combing her hair. When she was bored, he would even play the zither and compose poems to relieve her boredom. Wei Wei Bai lived a simple life, being served by Ning Yishu obediently. In these peaceful days, Ning Yishu's favorability actually rose to 97. Wei Wei Bai counted the days and knocked on the system. "Is it my turn to walk the storyline today?" The side mission had not been completed yet. Her storyline was to refine Ning Yishu into a pill and kick him off the cliff. In any case, as long as she did these 2 things well, she did not care about the process or the details. The ending was that Ning Yishu would be thrown into the pill furnace, he would escape, and then she would kick him off the cliff. She would be able to retreat with success. The system was full of sympathy. Yes, hurry and refine the pitiful male lead into a pill. He is still waiting for the good-for-nothing to counterattack. Wei Wei Bai was very experienced. This time, 16 months is too much. Look at my favorability. Do you believe that I will be able to surpass 100 today? The system was deeply suspicious. Even if the male lead was a PM, after being refined into a pill and kicked off the cliff, would the favorability still increase? Wei Wei Bai rubbed the system's doubtful head and smiled without saying anything. Ning Yishu was combing Wei Wei Bai's hair. Seeing her smile, he could not help but ask, "Master, did something good happen today? Why are you so happy?" Wei Wei Bai looked up, her entire body relaxed. "Ning Yishu, we did not complete the wedding ceremony last time. How about we get married again today?" Ning Yishu's body stiffened. He tightened his grip on her long hair. "Master, can you say that again?" Wei Wei Bai lazily said, "Why are you still calling me master? Who in this world doesn't know that you are my guest?" The matter of the 2 of them was spread by those idiots who came to attack Grand Heaven's Mountain. He didn't say anything bad. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about the petrified Ning Yishu. She leisurely got up and casually took out the red wedding dress that she had prepared. "Help me change," she said in a commanding tone. Ning Yishu didn't think there was anything wrong with her at all. In fact, he was so cute that he was willing to be enslaved by her. Out of habit, he began to help her put on the wedding dress. Her red dress swayed like fire, and her beauty was unparalleled. When he finished helping Wei Wei Bai tidy up her collar, he suddenly paused and his sluggish brain started to work. She said that she wanted to marry him? Marry him? Wei Wei Bai finished putting on the wedding dress. She raised her hand and casually picked a flower from the vase, placing it in her hair. "Do I look good?" She turned around and the corners of her mouth hooked. Her smile made Ning Yishu's heart drunk. Ning Yishu even forgot to breathe. He just foolishly looked at her. His eyes were filled with death aura, but an intense joy swept over him. His mouth couldn't even speak properly. Wei Wei Bai looked at him with disdain. "Hurry up and put on the wedding dress. We'll go through the motions." Ning Yishu still didn't dare to believe it. "You really want to marry me? Me this trash?" Wei Wei Bai impatiently poked his forehead with the tip of her finger. "Trash? The one I'm marrying is you. You're just like a gossipy woman." Ning Yishu stared at her and suddenly revealed a brilliant smile. His heart was filled with joy and happiness. It was all because of her. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 98. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 409. Ning Yishu held Wei Wei Bai's hand and arrived in front of the formation they used last time. They activated the simple dual cultivation formation that hadn't been modified in any way. Ning Yishu was the first to speak. I, Ning Yishu, am willing to be with Wei Wei Bai for eternity. With heaven and earth as the medium, with all living things as witnesses, we will be together for eternity. Wei Wei Bai didn't want to speak too much, so she directly said, I, Wei Wei Bai, agree. After saying that, the formation activated and imprinted a faint imprint on both of their souls. Without Ning Yishu's tyrannical modification, this imprint could easily be erased, and it could also easily break the dual cultivation partnership. When the imprint was imprinted on their souls, Ning Yishu suddenly said gently, Wei Wei, I love you. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, then she couldn't help but smile. Let's go, I'll give you a wedding gift. Although he didn't hear her reply, Ning Yishu didn't feel sad at all. The fact that she agreed to marry him, with her personality, was the best answer. Wei Wei Bai led him into the pill refining room, where the huge pill furnace had already started to burn. Ning Yishu didn't understand what was going on. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, the meridians in my body are very difficult to heal. Ning Yishu obviously knew how broken her meridians were, especially when she blocked a blow from a void-tempering cultivator and activated the Great Mountain Protecting Formation when she saved him. She was simply forcing him to his death. Ning Yishu's heart was full of pity. I will definitely think of a way to save you. Wei Wei Bai smiled happily. That's good, I'm still a bit embarrassed to say it. Didn't you say that you still have some strength left in your body? Now that my alchemy furnace is ready, you can go in and refine it. Refine your physical strength into medicinal pills for me to nourish my body. Ning Yishu did not respond. He stood there in a daze for a while. Then he asked softly, You married me just for this? Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. You can't say that. I happen to like you a little, so I'm kind enough to fulfill your wish before you die so that you can die happy. The light in Ning Yishu's eyes dimmed. He forced a smile, and his body seemed to have lost all strength. If it's what you want, I'll give it to you. Moreover, she liked him just a little bit. What else was there for him to be dissatisfied with? She had always been like this. He should have known. Ning Yishu walked in front of the pill furnace, his footsteps unsteady, almost unable to stand steadily. Wei Wei Bai turned a blind eye to him. She waved her hand to open the door to the pill furnace and pushed him inside. Ning Yishu fell into the pill furnace. Before he was swallowed by the flames, he suddenly used all his strength to reach out, wanting to touch her one last time. But Wei Wei Bai easily shook off his outstretched hand and expressionlessly closed the door. She was so heartless that she didn't even have the patience to deal with him one last time. It was only when the flames licked his body that he felt the pain. His heart ached so much that it covered the sky and covered the earth. Wei Wei Bai stood outside the pill furnace. She heard the sound of the favorability dropping. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95. Ning Yishu truly loved her. After being sent to hell by her so many times, the favorability only dropped this much. The system couldn't help but remind her, the male lead isn't prepared to break out of the pill furnace. He doesn't want to live anymore, he only wants to die. Wei Wei Bai, he won't die. Later, he'll cry and beg to open the pill furnace to escape. After saying this, she waved her hand. Green flames lit up in the pill furnace room. This was the sacrificial fire. Wei Wei Bai said word by word, I, Wei Wei Bai, am willing to sacrifice 1,000 years of my life to help Ning Yishu reconstruct his spirit root. This oath was heavy as a mountain as it was knocked into the pill furnace. Ning Yishu, who was thrown into the pill furnace, felt that something was wrong. This was because the flames in the pill furnace weren't eroding him. Instead, it was a powerful restorative force that was desperately repairing his damaged meridians and preparing to reconstruct his spirit root. He raised his head in shock and found that in the middle of the pill furnace, there was a blood-marked sword. Inside the sword, his spirit root was being strongly summoned. Even his heavenly soul was being pulled back into his body. Ning Ishu finally heard her voice. I am willing to sacrifice 1,000 years of my life to help Ning Ishu reconstruct his spirit root. Ning Ishu was completely stunned. A nascent soul cultivator's lifespan was just around 1,000 years. He crazily rushed to the side of the pill furnace and used all his strength to hit the pill furnace wall. He screamed in despair, Wei Bai, let me out. I won't allow you to sacrifice. Wei Bai stood outside the pill furnace and said to the system, See, I told you he would cry and beg me to let him out. System, I suddenly feel sorry for the male lead. Download the at https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 410. In the alchemy room, there was a huge alchemy furnace in the middle. Below the furnace was a circular formation. The formation was for Ning Ishu to reconstruct his spirit root. Reconstructing the spirit root required fuel. Wei Bai's 1,000-year lifespan was the fuel. She sat cross-legged outside the alchemy furnace, the green flame burning on the formation. She did not feel pain, because the flame burned nothing but her lifespan. 1,000-year lifespan was nothing to Wei Bai, because she could only live for 16 months at most, so she treated it as waste material. She looked at the alchemy furnace, letting Ning Ishu roar and stomp in it, but she was not moved at all. She knew that her body in this world was ruined by herself, so she sacrificed her nascent soul lifespan to Ning Ishu to reconstruct his spirit root. She would not be able to hold on for more than a few hours. Therefore, the remaining 5 favorability points, as well as the fucking missions of skinning, cutting off flesh, and sacrificing souls, had to be completed together. Wei Bai said, I feel so busy. A 16-month mission was squeezed into 3 months. She was so tired. The system said, hee. Wei Bai thought, this fucking system, what does that hee mean? Shouldn't a normal system be busy comforting its host? The system said, hurry up and finish it. Give the male lead a quick death. The male lead in this world was so miserable that it started to doubt life. Wei Bai said, if I didn't know better, I would have thought that you were Ning Ishu's system. The system was silent for a moment. If only I were Wei Bai, how much did the system dislike her? Wei Bai counted with her fingers how much of her lifespan had been burned. When it was almost time, she adjusted her expression and tried to calm her voice. She was calm with suppressed sadness. She was awe-inspiring with a sense of timidity and fear. She was cold and heartless with deep affection. Ning. Her voice sounded calmly. Ning Ishu was inside the pill furnace. His hands, which were pounding the walls of the pill furnace, were already badly mangled. When he heard Wei Bai's voice, he trembled violently and his eyes turned red. Master, please let me out. I beg you. This voice wept blood and despair, filled with madness at the end of the road. Her lifespan had turned into fuel, constantly reshaping his body. Every time his meridians were repaired, every time spirit chi entered his body. They were all terrified. This was her life. If he was getting better, it meant that she was getting weaker. Outside the pill furnace, Wei's lips curved into a smile. Do you know that the things in the illusion are all condensed from my past memories? Ning Ishu's fingers left deep blood marks on the walls of the furnace. His voice trembled. I know. Don't continue. With every breath that passed, several years of her lifespan would disappear. Wei Bai turned a deaf ear. I had a miserable childhood. My family was all killed. I went to Grand Heaven's Mountain. I was stupid and useless. I was bullied. Ning Ishu looked at his bloody hands and could only helplessly be trapped in the pill furnace. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. It's been 100 years. I've almost forgotten what happened in the past. But I remember that when I almost died in the woodshed, a mysterious senior saved me. He looked ordinary, but he could avoid everyone to save me. Isn't this strange? When Ning Ishu heard this, he frowned fiercely. Wasn't this what they had experienced in the illusion? But Wei Wei Bai meant that it was her real experience. Full text / Download. Chapter 411. Wei Wei Bai calmly continued, afterwards, my master wanted to possess my body and I had no way of resisting. Then, he appeared once again to save me. At that time, I felt that this man was the one I wanted and that I liked him. Ning Ishu's frantic hammering of the pill furnace froze as a look of shock flashed through his eyes. Of course, after that, he never appeared again. I am a cold-hearted person and in just a few years, I almost forgot all about him. When Wei Wei Bai said this, the calm in her voice finally cracked and became incomparably sorrowful. She laughed at herself. I also fulfilled my wish. I reached nascent soul in 100 years and the entire Grand Heavens Mountain is my grand disciple. I even took in a disappointing disciple. Ning Ishu opened his mouth several times, but was unable to shout out anything. The blood-mark long sword standing in the pill furnace was refined by Wei Wei Bai's lifespan. It had already turned into a golden dragon and began to revolve around Ning Ishu. Once the golden dragon entered Ning Ishu's body, he would be able to restore his spiritual roots. However, he did not feel happy at all. Only endless cold despair surrounded him. Wei Wei Bai said, that disciple is really disappointing. I saw the difference in his body long ago. For someone like me who is afraid of trouble, I would not accept such a disciple. Ning Ishu's voice weakened as he pleaded, I know I'm a cripple and I'm useless, so don't save me. Wei Wei Bai sneered, so you still know you're a cripple. If you didn't look so similar to him, I would have already killed you. Ning Ishu could not understand her words. You look exactly like the senior who saved me. Ning Ishu could not help but repeat, exactly the same? Wei Wei Bai said, I knew you weren't him, but sometimes I would run to your bedside and stare at you in the middle of the night. There was one time when you were seriously injured. When I saw you rolling around in pain, I couldn't help but feed you medicine. Ning Ishu finally remembered. At that time, he had been muddle-headed due to his illness. He had reached out to tear off a piece of her skirt and smelled a familiar fragrance. That was why he started to suspect that she was the one who had saved him and suddenly barged into her room for the first time. That was the first time he had received help from someone who was kind to him in Grand Heavens Mountain. It turned out that the person who was tormenting him was the same person who was giving him kindness. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes at the green flames and listened to the countdown to her lifespan. When you extracted your spiritual root to save me, I suddenly remembered what happened in the illusory realm. The labyrinth of illusions might have the power to distort time and space. That's why you didn't fall into the labyrinth of illusions. Instead, you traveled back in time and saved me. Wei Wei Bai watched as the green flames slowly extinguished. However, the pill furnace emitted a dazzling golden light. The burning of 1,000 years of lifespan allowed Ning Ishu, who was in the pill furnace, to temper a heavenly soul spiritual root. Wei Wei Bai walked to the pill furnace and listened to the man inside struggling with all his might. Ning, it's been 100 years, but I haven't forgotten you for a single moment. She reached out her hand and placed it on the pill furnace door. But I never thought that you would be the Ning who accompanied me through the most desperate days 100 years ago, and that I would torture and beat you in every possible way. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't suppress the trembling in her voice. Ah, so I've been tormenting the man I love. Inside the pill furnace, Ning Ishu suddenly stopped all his movements. He stood there covered in wounds, and for a moment he actually forgot to stop the golden dragon from approaching him. Only her words echoed in his mind. The man I love. Chapter 412. His despairing heart was filled with gentle joy, and this joy was filled with endless sorrow. The alchemy furnace rumbled, and a dragon entered Ning Ishu's body. Spirit root reconstruction. Wei Wei Bai shook violently and fell to the ground. Then she heard the system's notification. Ding, favorability is at 97, 98. The system said, you can actually use this scenario twice? Damn, it was bad enough that she randomly made up her own identity, but she could still use such a lousy story in an illusion. She could even create a lover for 100 years. The host was too good at playing, it had to admit defeat. Wei Wei Bai said helplessly, the original owner tortured Ning Ishu to death, that sadistic demon. I guess no matter how much Ning Ishu loved me, he would still have some resentment in his heart. 100% love. It did not allow any impurities. So I could only tell him that I beat him, abused him, and kicked him because he looked exactly like the man I loved. In the end, the man she loved was still him. Are you surprised? Are you surprised? Ning Ishu would definitely be overjoyed. There would be no resentment left. The system said, this is too lame, too old-fashioned. Wei Wei Bai suddenly saw that her black hair had turned white. She was silent for a moment. I'm old? The system said, your hair is as white as snow, faint wrinkles are crawling up your forehead, and the touch of time has created countless wrinkles on your face. You're already at the end of your life, you're an old woman around 100 years old, so don't talk about white hair, even a sneeze would cause you to leak urine. Wei Bai covered her face in despair. No, I can't believe I'm old. The system said earnestly, who isn't old? You're old sooner or later, you're going to die anyway. Don't worry about it, finish the mission, and let's pack up and go back. Wei Wei Bai refused, I'm not old no matter who's old, I'll always be a young and beautiful fairy. The system fell silent. Who the hell was this young and beautiful fairy? It refused to have such a lowly fairy as its host. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched her own face. It was still smooth, but when she touched the corner of her eyes, she actually found a faint eye line. She staggered a few steps and suddenly dashed out. The system cursed, wait a minute, the male lead is still in the furnace, at least open a door and let him out. Otherwise, how are you going to complete your mission? Wei Wei Bai was going crazy. I don't have much time left. I only have about 10 minutes left. I estimate that in less than a few minutes, my face will become wrinkled like an orange peel. If Ning Ishu sees me like this, his 98 favorability will probably drop to -98. The system said, true love is not afraid of age difference. Wei Wei Bai, can you love someone who's old enough to be your grandmother? The system thought of a white-haired, toothless, trembling and urinating tyrant standing in front of it. It was speechless. The host was right, it couldn't love her. Wei Wei Bai covered her face and whimpered, I feel like our family is going to die, I don't have the face to attack him. The system was about to shout a few words of encouragement when a terrifying loud noise came from behind them. Yi Sui and Tong Yi turned around at the same time and saw that the entire furnace had exploded. The golden light mixed with the ominous red blood shadow surged into a ball. Wei Wei Bai's face turned serious. Tong Yi, where's the nearest cliff? The system opened the map and gave her directions. The nearest one is 10 minutes away from here. Although it's a cliff, it's not very high. Chapter 413. Wei Wei Bai nodded and reached out to touch her face, trying to pull herself together. So what if she's old? Maybe Ning Ishu has a heavy taste and likes her like this? The pill furnace was blasted open by a terrifying force, and the flames and dust mixed together. Ning Ishu bent over in the flames, as if he was in pain. His whole body trembled as he kept muttering, Master, Master, don't leave me behind. Suddenly, he raised his head, and a pair of black eyes were half bright and half dark, with a golden light desperately flowing in them. There was no warmth, only a terrifying dark and evil aura. He saw Wei Wei Bai outside the flames. She was standing not far away, her black hair had already turned white, her pear-white face was devoid of blood, and faint wrinkles began to appear at the corners of her beautiful eyes. She used all of her lifespan to shape his spirit root. A person who loved to look beautiful was now beginning to age. Ning Ishu's expression twisted, and he felt even more heartache for those wrinkles on his face than she did. Wei Wei Bai tiredly smiled at him. All right, you helped me draw out my spirit root, and I'll return it to you. From now on, we don't owe each other anything. After saying that, she used the last of her magic power to make herself disappear. Ning Ishu's pupils contracted, and he stumbled forward, The power in his body was so out of control that it felt like it was about to explode. The familiar spiritual power had all returned, and he was no longer a waste. But he would rather be a waste. As long as she didn't dislike him, he could be a waste that only belonged to her for the rest of his life. Ning Ishu's expression turned sinister, and his fingers quickly formed a formation in the air. Find her for me. The formation's power quickly revolved, and a strange power appeared in the air, constantly moving away. That was the direction Wei Wei Bai left in. Ning Ishu quickly rushed over. He wouldn't let her leave. How could she not want him like this? Wei Wei Bai finally managed to climb to the edge of the cliff, and she really had to crawl. Her body couldn't take it. She was beginning to collapse. Her face was still okay. She had bought a beauty mask from the system, so she could keep her beauty. Wei Wei Bai managed to grab hold of a rock on the edge of the cliff and leaned against it to stand up straight. The wind on the cliff was strong and cold. She really wanted to sneeze. However, when she thought of the stubborn illness of the elderly, she stiffened and held back her sneeze, not daring to open her mouth. It was too difficult to hold it in. His eyes were red and tears flowed from his eyes. When Ning Ishu arrived, he saw Wei Wei Bai with a head full of white hair, looking down the cliff with tears in her eyes. Was she going to commit suicide? Ning Ishu reflexively held his breath, not daring to let her discover him. Step by step, he suddenly pounced on her. Only then did Wei Wei Bai react. At this moment, it was Bai Wei Wei's most difficult counterattack. She actually lifted her foot and unhesitatingly kicked Ning Ishu, who was flying towards her, even though her body was so weak. Of course, this kick was nothing to Ning Ishu, but if he dodged, the huge momentum would cause Wei Wei Bai to fall off the cliff. Thus, he chose to let her kick him, and because he was too fast, he fell off the cliff. Wei Wei Bai, this meant that the mission of climbing the cliff was completed, although it was a surprise. There was still the scenario of skinning and cutting off the flesh, as well as sacrificing the soul. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that she couldn't take it anymore. She fell to the ground and her vision was gray. Did she have presbyopia? Ning Ishu stopped in the middle of the cliff and stepped on the void to fly up again. He saw her sitting on the ground with empty eyes. Chapter 4:14. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt someone hugging her. Then Ning Ishu's hoarse voice rang out, Wei Wei? I will save you. There was no end to saving and saving, right? Wei Wei Bai refused to repeat such an old and tired joke. She reached out and firmly pinched his face. She couldn't see clearly as long as she had a mouth to speak. Do you have a knife? Ning Ishu blankly looked at her and repeated like a parrot, Knife? Wei Wei Bai coughed and immediately held back. She said with difficulty, I once cultivated an evil technique from the demon realm. I used up my lifespan, so if I want to forcibly extend my life, I can only turn into a demon. Ning Ishu was already unable to think carefully. His fingers gently touched the wrinkles that were beginning to appear on her face. He wished he could erase those wrinkles. Give me a knife. Wei Wei Bai suddenly ordered. Ning Ishu's fingers shook and he used his spiritual power to form a small knife. Wei Wei Bai reached out and grabbed it. She suddenly said with some grievance, I don't have the strength, I can't hold it. Ning Ishu immediately grabbed her hand in panic. Okay, Wei Wei, I'll hold it for you. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but smile, although her face had already begun to show the wrinkles of age. In his eyes, she was still beautiful, but her actions made him feel at a loss. That knife fell on her chest and cut through the red wedding dress. The tip of the knife broke through the skin. Blood gushed out. Ning Ishu finally exploded. He angrily shouted, Wei Bai, what are you doing? Wei Wei Bai weakly said, this cultivation technique is evil. To turn into a demon, you need my flesh. Although it was skinning and cutting the flesh, because the side mission was too simple, she had just checked with the system. The knife only needed to cut the skin and pierce the flesh to complete the mission. Ning Ishu's eyes reddened. Can't you ask me? Am I willing to reconstruct my spirit root? If he regained his strength, she would have to pay with her life. He would rather have died under her torture in the first place. Wei Wei Bai forced a sneer. What does it have to do with me whether you're willing or not? I am willing. That is the most important thing. His selfishness was truly hateful. However, he loved her so much that he was about to break down. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 99. Wei Wei Bai sighed softly. Remember, my soul will leave my body later. Restrain my soul for a while and then release it. I will return to my body and be resurrected. These words were calm and firm. It was as if he could really be resurrected. Ning Yishu couldn't believe it either. Really? Wei Wei Bai finally revealed a sweet and gentle smile. Yo, idiot, you still don't believe me? How can such a selfish person like me sacrifice so much? I will definitely survive. Ning Yishu was like a person in despair who saw a ray of light. His lips and tongue trembled. Really? Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes. She softly hummed. Ning Yishu finally said, all right, you have to come back to life. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. Side mission, soul sacrifice refinement, countdown to completion. Wei Wei Bai was also gambling. Although it was a soul sacrifice refinement, the time given by the system was very short. As long as Ning Yishu used a spell to restrain her soul, it would count as a soul sacrifice. Right, that old pervert in menopause also knew about this side mission. It was insanely difficult. Therefore, it was just a formality. But what she was gambling on was that Ning Yishu wouldn't be such a waste that he couldn't even catch her soul. After Wei Wei Bai closed her eyes, Ning Yishu felt her body soften. She was peacefully held in his arms. It was as if she had fallen asleep. But Ning Yishu knew that this wasn't sleeping, but death. Chapter 415. His eyes were extremely bright, and all the strength in his body surged out, forming an array to capture the soul. On her soul, there was a faint mark of being husband and wife with him. With this mark, he would definitely be able to find her. Suddenly, not far from the array, a light appeared. It was Wei Wei Bai's soul, a white and misty ball. Ning Yishu's heart, which had been stretched to the limit, suddenly relaxed. His eyes flashed with ecstasy. She didn't lie to him. Her soul was still there. She was still alive. Ning Yishu carefully reached out and held her soul. He looked carefully and saw a small person curled up in the white light, like a baby in its mother's womb. That small body and the quiet sleeping face were all Wei Wei Bai's. Cute and weak. Ning Yishu didn't even dare to move his fingers. He restrained her soul for a short while. Then he began to withdraw from the array, worried that the power of the array would hurt her soul. After all, she looked so fragile. Ning Yishu revealed a surprised smile. After the array was withdrawn, he let go of his hand. The white, misty soul gradually disappeared into thin air. But he didn't hear a calm voice coming from the void. Ding, the host's side quest is completed. Favorability is full. Preparing to leave this plane. Countdown to the opening of the Xianxia High Energy World Passage. Successful escape. Ning Yishu thought that when he let go, Wei Wei Bai would wake up. Because she said that this was an evil technique for those who were possessed. It could bring people back from the dead. To him, it didn't matter if she was possessed or not, as long as she could survive. He could slaughter the world. Ning Yishu hugged her body and sat on the cliff in a daze. It seemed to have been a long time. Ning Yishu used his spiritual power to protect the corpse in his arms. He kept the corpse from rotting. But the corpse was still a corpse. She hadn't come back yet. Why didn't he come back? Ning Yishu felt that he had not waited long enough. He did not dare to leave, for fear that Wei Wei Bai's soul would not be able to find its way. His body no longer needed to eat, nor did he feel thirsty. He didn't even feel tired. Therefore he could still wait. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 10 years. Master, why aren't you back yet? He had waited for her for a long time. Wei Wei Bai heard a familiar voice. Host has completed the mission. The difficulty level has increased. You have received 40 days of life, a total of 47 days of life. When she heard this, the corners of her mouth had yet to curl up into a smile. A series of demerit reminders had arrived. Ding, painkiller pill for 4 days. 5 days to fill in the settings and 1 day to activate the illusion. 7 days of brain damage. 1 beauty mask and 15 system masks for 3 days. Congratulations, you have 27 life points remaining. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai could finally wake up with a smile. The system suddenly said, "You need to stay calm." Wei Wei Bai was in a good mood. "I'm very calm." Wei Wei Bai, who had been abused by her life points, really felt that she was very good. She opened her eyes and a cold, handsome face appeared above her. Yi Yuxuan. Wei Wei Bai reflexively trembled her life points. Seeing this unlucky person, she couldn't wait to leave as soon as possible. Yi Yuxuan's expression was very strange, and even stranger. They were so close, but the system did not remind her that her life points were being taken away by him. Wei Wei Bai was just about to speak. Yi Yuxuan's handsome face suddenly became ferocious. A golden light flashed in his eyes. "Why?" He hysterically reached out his hand and grabbed her neck. "I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you. Why didn't you come back?" Yi Yuxuan's eyes were full of resentment and despair, but also full of twisted sadness and pain. It was as if he was going to cry. Chapter 416. It was as if he was going to cry. He had waited for too long. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years. He had waited for 1,000 years. The Cultivation Master's Blackened Disciple sequel. At first, Ning Yishu thought that the resurrection would take time. He didn't dare to leave and didn't dare to move her body easily. He could only silently use his spiritual power to comb through her meridians and maintain her appearance before she left. Sometimes, when he saw a few more wrinkles on Wei Wei Bai's face, he couldn't help but use his gentle spiritual power to smooth them out. Little by little, he kept her body in its youngest and most beautiful state. When his master came back and saw that she was so young and beautiful, he would definitely be very happy. She had always been like this, superficial and fond of beautiful things. He knew that she liked to be praised for her beauty. "You're so beautiful that the sun and moon lose their light. In this world, no one can surpass your beauty. Women are ugly, men are mud ball dregs. Who can compare to a finger of yours? Master, when will you come back?" He kept talking to her, talking to himself. He hoped that one day she would open her eyes and kick him angrily. Or scold him again. He would definitely be overjoyed. But he waited for a long time, wind and rain, sun and sun, autumn leaves and winter snow. The cycle of the seasons. She was still a corpse. Ning Yishu began to panic and go crazy. The terrifying thought in his heart that he had never dared to face finally appeared. Wei Wei Bai couldn't be resurrected at all. He had a retentive memory, and he had read many ancient books. He took away the magic treasures and secret books of the mystic realm for 10,000 years. There were so many things, so many books, but there was no way to resurrect like Wei Wei Bai said. He knew very well that this was not the process of becoming a demon. But because she was going to die, he could only believe what she said and didn't dare to disobey. Ning Yishu desperately suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He began to use his spiritual power to comb through Wei Wei Bai's meridians again. "No, you just need some time. I can wait." Just as he finished speaking, he heard a low growl coming from the void. "Little thief Ning Yishu, I'm here to take your dog life today." Ning Yishu looked up expressionlessly. Then he saw countless cultivators flying over on their swords from the top of the cliff. The leader was actually Yu Chen's master, who was beaten away by Wei Wei Bai. It was said that the attack of the spirit formation had severely injured him and forced him to go into seclusion. Now that he had come out of seclusion, this old turtle had broken through from the void tempering stage to the body integration stage. As soon as he came out of seclusion, he gathered a group of disciples and grand disciples and swore to kill Ning Yishu and Wei Wei Bai. The old turtle floated like an immortal and sat on a huge flower. He said coldly, "I heard that the bitch Wei Wei Bai is dead. She's lucky that I don't have to refine her soul and suffer for eternity." Ning Yishu was indifferent at first. Hearing this, he suddenly raised his eyes, which were full of murderous intent. "Who did you say is dead?" The old turtle said coldly, "You're holding a corpse yourself. Who are you talking about? Wei Wei Bai's disciple is not only a loser, but also a fool." As soon as he said this, everyone burst into laughter. Ning Yishu ignored the insult and retorted fiercely, "My master will be resurrected. She will come back." The old turtle was certain. Come back? How will she come back? Her soul has disappeared, and her corpse is lifeless. And a lifeless corpse couldn't contain any soul. Not even the soul of the person. Is at https://www.sashu.com/. Chapter 417. Even her own soul couldn't do it. Ning Yishu also understood this logic, but he didn't want to wake up, nor did he want to believe it. The old turtle snorted. If you are sure that her soul can return to life, why don't you dare to make a soul condensing array? The soul condensing array will tell you if her soul is still there. This was common knowledge in the cultivation world that all foundation establishment cultivators knew. But Ning Yishu didn't dare to make it. He reached out and hugged Wei Wei Bai's body tightly, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't dare, the old turtle sneered. You can't even make a soul condensing array. I'll make one for you. With that said, a simple soul condensing array appeared under Ning Yishu. The array circulated a few times and suddenly dimmed. Ning Yishu stared at the soul condensing array in a daze. There was no reaction. A corpse without a soul wouldn't make it react. Seeing that Ning Yishu didn't react, the old turtle snorted. You're lying to yourself. Killing a person like you is simply dirtying my hands. Then he picked up a flower with his fingers. The flower shone brightly and turned into thousands of flower swords in the blink of an eye. The flower swords suddenly pierced into Ning Yishu's body. Ning Yishu hugged Wei Wei Bai indifferently. The flower swords fell, but he didn't dodge. The old turtle saw his flower swords blast the cliff into pieces. He sneered. You're just an ant. With that said, he was about to leave. In the sword light, a heart-wrenching roar suddenly came, and a terrifying golden spiritual energy shattered all the attacks. Ning Yishu hugged Wei Wei Bai and stood in the surging golden spiritual energy. His eyes were stained by the golden light, and he was completely crazy. The spiritual energy shook heaven and earth. I want all of you to die. With a simple sentence, the heavenly soul shook the foundation of the entire plane, and all the creatures in front of him were turned into dust. Ning Yishu killed everyone, but he didn't react at all. He carefully carried Wei Wei Bai on his back. Master, I think you're lost. If you can't come back, I'll go find you. He searched. 200 years passed. He had searched the entire cultivation world upside down. There was no imprint of her soul. He was at a loss for 100 years and suddenly wondered if soar. Therefore, he began to cultivate. When he was tired, he would lean against the ice coffin that protected the corpse and fall asleep. 400 years later, he broke through the form synthesis stage and reached the great vehicle stage. After another 300 years, he began to transcend tribulation soar. Fearing that the lightning tribulation would destroy Bai Weiwei's body, he carried the entire ice coffin on his back. That was why the lightning tribulation struck his body, and not a single one of them could touch his ice coffin. When he successfully ascended and stepped onto the stairway to heaven, he suddenly saw the imprint of her souls. No one could break through the other plane. Ning Yishu gave up his chance to soar almost instantly. He rushed into the path of that plane. Master, the strong repulsive force melted his body piece by piece. He turned into a skeleton. The skeleton also melted. Only his soul was left. And Wei Wei Bai's faint soul imprint finally became more and more obvious. Ning Yishu cried and laughed at the same time. His soul gradually shattered. In the end, only a fragment of his soul was left. It was an unwilling obsession. It was the purest love. It broke through the plain wall that no one could break through and rushed to the world where she was. This pure unwillingness and fanatical love fell into Yi Yuxuan's body. Yi Yuxuan? No, Ning Yishu woke up. Chapter 418. Then came Qin Qiu's voice, He's very good, I guarantee that he's a well-rounded young man. Just give him another chance. Bai Changyan said coldly, a good young man actually did that to my daughter, and even Wei Wei said that she wants to cancel the engagement. Wei Wei Bai heard her father's voice. She really couldn't take off her underwear. She was just about to put on her clothes again when her vision turned black. System, what's wrong with me? System, what misunderstanding do you have about your trashy physical fitness? Running and jumping, she basically lived on liquid food and glucose for 3 days. Hypoglycemia. Wei Wei Bai thought that she would fall on the bathroom floor. But she was embraced by a warm embrace. Wei, you are. She didn't finish this sentence before she fainted. When she lost consciousness, the system activated the newbie gift package. Then it dragged her to the next plane. The system looked back and saw Yuxuan holding Wei Wei Bai and asked, "You're her, right? The person who always appears in my dreams?" The system sighed tiredly, then turned around and followed Wei Wei Bai to the next plane without hesitation. Qin Qiu was still trying to persuade Bai Changyan. My Yuxuan, handsome, right? His work attitude is first class. Although his family background is good, he never bullies others. My Yuxuan, he's just a little shy. He never messes around, and he's still a virgin after so long. My Yuxuan, in fact, is very pure, and pure. He's the 3 pure men. My Yuxuan, Bai Changyan felt like there were 10,000 flies flying around him. Qin Qiu was still praising his own family's child. The 2 people just walked to the door of the girls' bathroom and saw that the door was open. They accidentally glanced inside. Then they saw Yuxuan holding Wei Wei Bai. One had his head down affectionately, the other's clothes were messy. Bai Changyan was stunned. He took 2 steps forward. He finally saw that the person in Yuxuan's arms was his daughter. What was even more frightening was that his daughter's clothes were undone, revealing a large portion of her fair shoulders. It was like being struck by lightning. Bai Changyan's mind went blank. Yuxuan, this pervert, actually put his daughter in the ladies' room. Then he took off his daughter's clothes. What was he doing? Beast, let go of my daughter. I'll fight it out with you. Old man Bai had a tragic look on his face as he rushed straight into the washroom. Seeing this, Qin Qiu immediately hugged Bai Changyan. Uncle Bai, why can't we talk nicely? Don't be angry. Be careful of high blood pressure. When Yuxuan saw that someone was coming, she immediately turned around. After blocking everyone's view, he carefully helped Wei Wei Bai put on her clothes. Button by button, button by button. His attitude was focused and gentle. At the door, Qin Qiu was holding Bai Changyan. Let go of me, you little bastard, I'm going to kill him. Qin Qiu begged for mercy. No, this is a misunderstanding, it must be a misunderstanding. Father Bai, fuck your misunderstanding, I'm going to die with you. Yuxuan turned a blind eye to the fierce conflict of others. When he buttoned her clothes back, his fingers accidentally slipped over her white skin. The delicate touch made him feel like he was electrocuted. Coupled with the impact just now, he felt that his nose was a little hot. Yuxuan reached out and touched it. Unexpectedly, he had a nosebleed. Father Bai looked up with difficulty and saw in the mirror that pervert Yi was actually having a nosebleed at his daughter. He was so excited that he suddenly couldn't breathe. Qin Qiu noticed that something was wrong and he looked up. Bai Changyan was so excited that he fainted. Qin Qiu was shocked. Fuck, this is going to anger Bai Changyan to death. It would be strange if Wei Wei Bai didn't kill their whole family in the future. He immediately carried Bai Changyan. Yuxuan, this is your father-in-law, quickly help save him. Yuxuan carried Wei Wei Bai and indifferently walked over. He passed by Qin Qiu, his eyes were terrifyingly light. Well, quickly go save him. After that, he carried Wei Wei Bai and left. Qin Qiu, is this your father-in-law or my father-in-law? Yuxuan, you bastard, you should be alone for the rest of your life. Collection below to record this reading record. Chapter 419. He could already hear the salivating and gulping sounds of the wraiths standing silently behind him as they surged forward. When Wei Wei Bai heard his words, she seemed to believe him. The tears in her eyes fell with a pitter-patter. The tears fell on Ji Yongchuan's hand. This trace of coldness actually made his fingers hurt. It relieved a lot. She sobbed and said, "No, uncle wouldn't harm me." Ji Yongchuan's eyes flashed with ridicule. "If he didn't harm you, why would he put you in the cemetery?" Wei Wei Bai was at a loss, as if she didn't know how to explain. She could only answer, "There must be a reason I don't know, I'll go back and ask him." "Idiot." Ji Yongchuan sneered in his heart. He said softly, "Okay, when the clothes are undone, I'll accompany you to find your uncle." Wei Wei Bai looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You're so nice, I'm Wei Wei Bai Bai, what about you?" Ji Yongchuan was silent for a moment, and then he introduced himself, "I'm called Ji Yongchuan." When ghosts and humans exchanged names, it meant that there was a bond. But she was going to die soon, so this bond was nothing. Ji Yongchuan had already undone most of her clothes. Under the red wedding dress, her exquisite and slender figure was faintly discernible. His movements were a bit slow, and his eyes were a bit shaky. The female ghost had seen so many things, but this was the first time she saw a human girl's body. In the end, he was born in nothingness, and it was only a few years ago that he truly gained consciousness. Wei Wei Bai could be considered the first human girl he had come into contact with. She was different from all kinds of coquettish and dirty female ghosts. The scent on her body was unbelievably fresh and sweet. No wonder she could attract so many ghosts waiting behind him. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out and softly placed her hand on the back of his hand. Under the back of his hand, there were dozens of little ghosts struggling and screaming, because they had to resist the attack of the wedding dress. Ji Yongchuan fiercely paused, her pat almost made the ghosts in his hand escape. He looked up coldly and tried to suppress the coldness in his voice. "You can move now?" Wei Wei Bai's face turned red. She tried to avoid his gaze. "I can barely move after you take off my clothes, so can I take them off myself?" Under her wedding dress, she was only wearing a thin nightgown. It was natural for her to be shy. Ji Yongchuan paused for a moment before slowly retracting his hand. "All right, take it off yourself," Wei Wei Bai said, "then turn around." Ji Yongchuan clenched his fists tightly, and a few of the ghosts in his hands were crushed to death. Then he slowly turned around and said, "Take it off." "I won't look." Wei Wei Bai shyly replied, "Thank you, little brother." The system's balls hurt. It gritted its teeth and said, "Can you not be so mushy?" Wei Wei Bai, "My mind is blank." Wei Wei Bai said, "Every time I think about how there are ghosts everywhere, and Ji Yongchuan is also a ghost, I feel chills all over my body and my scalp tingle." Wei Wei Bai said, "That's why I can't maintain a high standard of performance. I can only be myself." The system said, "Be yourself?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Please. My heart is pure and shy. That's the effect of my instincts." The system thought. Every time the system thought that the host's face was thick enough, the host would cross its bottom line again. Pure and shy? Does the host have some serious misunderstanding of these two words? Ji Yongchuan suddenly said, "Are you done? We have to leave quickly." Time was almost up. Ji Yongchuan's eyes turned colder. Wei Wei Bai said, "Just a little more and I can take it off." It was too late. Time was almost up. Ji Yongchuan suddenly made a gesture to the ghosts beside him. The ghosts with green faces and fangs bowed their heads respectfully. Then, they obeyed his order and suddenly rushed over. Ji Yongchuan's expression changed. He shouted in fear, "There are so many ghosts. Come out quickly. We have to run quickly." He suddenly threw himself onto the coffin. His whole body was burned by the talisman. His expression was pained. Behind him, the ghosts grabbed him with their hands. "Little brother?" Wei Wei Bai's terrified voice sounded. Ji Yongchuan screamed as he was dragged out of the coffin. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai crawled out of the coffin in fear and worry. She dragged her wedding dress out of the coffin and stumbled to the ground. She reached out and grabbed his hand. Ji Yongchuan felt his slightly cold fingers being held by her warm hand. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the ground, holding on to him tightly. She wanted to cry. Let's run quickly. Ji Yongchuan lowered his head and slowly revealed a strange smile. His fingers tightened. Finally, his sacrificial offering caught him. Transmigration system. My Prince Charming, come here. 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 Comma. Chapter 420. Wei Wei Bai nodded, indicating that she understood. Just as she stepped over the white line, she saw an extremely strange scene. Beyond the white line was the road of dawn, and above it was the day when the sun had just risen. And her other foot that had not yet stepped out, the graveyard was still gloomy at night. This extremely illogical scene made one's hair stand on end. Wei Wei Bai had goosebumps all over. She was just about to completely leave the graveyard's night and escape to the human road. Damn it, let go of me. Suddenly, Ji Yongchuan's angry voice came. She turned around and saw that he was actually lying on the ground. All the ghosts were pulling Ji Yongchuan's feet. None of them chased after Wei Wei Bai, because every ghost coveted the Ghost King who had lost his power. Eat him. He could become the next Ghost King. This made 100 ghosts go crazy. One ghost after another, like a human pyramid, they were all squeezed together, thousands of ghost hands pulling Ji Yongchuan. And the graveyard also became a huge black whirlpool. There were mournful ghost cries below. Below the whirlpool was a bottomless abyss of hell. Wei Wei Bai's scalp was numb, her face was pale, and her whole body was electrified with fear. Even if the prehistoric Godzilla breathed fire at her, she could easily face it. Only when faced with these ghost things. She couldn't wait to give up on the guide and run away. The system couldn't help but remind, if the male lead is pulled down, there will be no more male lead. Wei Wei Bai took a few deep breaths. Shut up, of course I know. After she finished, she finally stuffed her heart that was scared to the throat into her chest, and then pulled her feet back from the human road. Without hesitation, she turned around and rushed, seeing that Ji Yongchuan was about to be pulled down by thousands of evil ghosts. She used all her strength, stretched out her hands, and in a perfect leap, she grabbed his hand. Ji Yongchuan's whole body trembled, and he suddenly looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears of fear, and desperately rushed over. Then she reached out and grabbed his hand. Her hands were filled with fear and sweat, but she used all her strength to hold on to him without any hesitation. Ji Yongchuan looked at her blankly, as if he didn't understand why she didn't run away. Just now, she had clearly stepped out of the cemetery and was about to return to the human world. Why did he come back? Wei Wei Bai immediately gave the answer. Little brother, hurry up and run. I'm coming to save you. Her face was deathly pale, and her bloodless lips trembled. She was so scared that she could faint at any moment. Ji Yongchuan felt as if something had moved in his empty chest. He was clearly not human and did not have a living heart. However, when she grabbed him, it made him think that his heart was alive and even beating. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. Ji Yongchuan suddenly said, "What's that tied to your arm?" The Ghost King imprint on her body would release the power of the Bai family. It was definitely because of the existence of something, and it was impossible to directly tamper with the Ghost King imprint. Wei Wei Bai looked up blankly. She suddenly thought of something and let go of one hand. Then she reached under her t-shirt and her fingers traced along her chest, groping upwards. Ji Yongchuan looked up and saw that her short t-shirt was open, revealing a large amount of white and smooth skin. He could even faintly see her underwear. His eyes trembled and his throat tightened. Wei Wei Bai's eyes suddenly lit up. She felt a red talisman above her collarbone. When this talisman was taken out, Ji Yongchuan couldn't help but feel fear. This thing, to ghosts, was simply a nuclear bomb. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Collect button below to record this reading record. Chapter 421. Ji Yongchuan saw her blank eyes and immediately said, "Throw the talisman out." Wei Weibai didn't think much and threw the talisman out. The red talisman suddenly stopped in midair and exploded with an unimaginable light. The strong exorcism power dispersed the green light of the moon. The group of ghosts that were holding Ji Yongchuan suddenly screamed. Ji Yongchuan didn't have it easy either, but he had a strong resistance and immediately broke free from the shackles of the ghost hands. He then stood up without hesitation and pulled Wei Weibai to run outside. In the dark sky, only the red talisman shone like the sun. Finally, the two of them rushed out of the white line and were hit by the light of day. Wei Weibai looked back and saw the graveyard in the dark was disintegrating. At the same time, the red talisman gradually lost its power. The scary ghosts looked up and stared at them under the light of day. Wei Weibai said, "Slagstem, that's scary." The system said, "Don't be afraid, they will only come to you at night, you are safe now." Wei Weibai, "What should I do if I'm even more scared?" Ji Yongchuan felt very uncomfortable under the light of day because he had lost a lot of power. But he couldn't enter the darkness now, because the ghosts in the darkness were waiting to devour him. He felt a burning sensation on his skin as it came into contact with the sun. Suddenly, a hand gently landed on his forehead. Ji Yongchuan looked up and saw Wei Weibai's worried face. "Little brother, are you okay? You're hot." Of course he was hot after being steamed by the sun. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but her hand was cold. As a result, the burning sensation on his body faded quite a bit. He couldn't help but relax his body. As soon as he relaxed, his body collapsed. Ji Yongchuan's body went soft and fell into Wei Weibai's arms. Wei Weibai reached out to catch him and found that his body was warm. "Isn't the ghost cold? Why does it feel like he has a high fever?" Bai Weiwei held a scalding hot ghost, her whole body stiff. The system said, "He fainted." Wei Weibai, "Yeah, so ghosts can faint too, huh?" The system said, "The red talisman has lost its power." When Wei Weibai heard this, she turned around and saw the eerie graveyard. The eerie night had returned. Then, it slowly eroded towards them. Wei Weibai widened her eyes and erupted with an unimaginable strength, carrying Ji Yongchuan on her back. Then, she ran forward with all her might. There was a ghost. It was so scary. With great difficulty, Ji Yongchuan finally broke free from the trance of the scattered ghost aura, only to find that he was actually lying on Wei Weibai's back. She struggled to walk forward step by step. Her small body dragged him along as she sweated profusely. He heard her panting. "Come on, we're going to be saved. There are so many ghosts and it's so scary." The Bai family was actually afraid of ghosts. How rare. Ji Yongchuan couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, his smile froze. He was actually in a good mood? He pursed his lips, furrowed his brows, and didn't say a word. He just lay on top of her, making it difficult for her to move forward step by step. With great difficulty, he finally saw a street not far away. They had completely arrived in the human world. Bai Weiwei, on the other hand, was completely exhausted. A ghost was actually so heavy. Seeing that she really couldn't walk, Ji Yongchuan pretended to open his eyes. "Where are we?" Wei Weibai turned around in surprise. "You're awake?" Ji Yongchuan's handsome face was stunned for a moment, then finally revealed a joyful smile. "We're saved." Wei Weibai put him down and shook her extremely sore hands without batting an eyelid. She also revealed a cute and innocent smile. "Yes, we're saved, little brother." The two of them laughed so innocently, without any shrewdness at all. The system, hee hee. The next time when you open the bookshelf, you will see it. If you like. Chapter 422. So if you want a strategy, you can't hide it in the Taoist temple. Half a month had passed, Wei Weibai could only stake everything on this. Compared to ghosts, favorability is more important. When she returned to her original home, Wei Weibai looked at the candles in the house and the talisman papers scattered all over the floor. It was a mess. The remnants of the fight with Bai Wen were still there. Wei Bai rolled up her sleeves and started to clean up the house. After cleaning for half a day, she finally wiped the sofa and chairs clean and pushed them back to their original positions. The sky was dark. Wei Bai made herself some instant noodles to fill her stomach. As she ate, she looked at the half-finished house and suddenly felt lonely. Sigh, it's so good to have a nanny. Housework is not easy. After eating the instant noodles, she went to the kitchen to throw them away, then turned on the tap and started to wash her hands. A gust of cold wind blew past his neck. It was as if an ice-cold kiss had landed on her skin. Bai Wei was so agitated that she trembled. She looked back. There was nothing strange in the empty kitchen. Wei Bai walked out of the kitchen and went to take a shower. She filled the bathtub and started to take off her clothes. Halfway through taking off her clothes, she felt that something was wrong. She looked at the mirror for a long time. Even the system felt that something was wrong. What did you feel? Wei Bai was in a daze. I was so beautiful. System, Wei Bai said, so you can block yourself, I want to take a shower. The system was silent for a while, then said, who wants to look at you? After that, the system blocked her and decided to go to sleep. Wei Bai was just used to scolding the system, but after that she realized that the system was really scared away. She sighed hypocritically. Your heart is so weak, it's lucky that you met a good host like me, or else you would be despised. She took off her clothes and stepped into the bathtub. In the mirror, a pale hand suddenly appeared and slowly touched her body in the mirror. In the mirror, a black, ghostly figure slowly revealed a strange and eerie smile. Wei Bai was soaking in the bathtub. Her mind was still calculating what expression she should put on when she saw Ji Yongxuan. It was best to put on an expression of shock, happiness, guilt, pain, and sorrow. The lines had to be more tragic and emotional. Wei Bai reached out and rubbed her face, worried that her face couldn't hold so many different expressions. She suddenly felt that the water was cold. Did you forget to adjust the temperature? As Wei Bai soaked in the water, she did not know why her head was getting heavier and heavier. She was so sleepy that she could not open her eyes, but her mind was clear. Something was slowly approaching her. The water in the bathtub swayed. Who entered the bathtub? Wei Bai had a splitting headache. She wanted to open her eyes, but she couldn't. She called Slagstem a few times. Slagstem didn't respond either. Could it be that she was dreaming? An ice-cold hand slowly moved up her leg. Wei Bai shivered. She used all her strength, but she couldn't move. There was a huge force in the air that was pressing down on her. She opened her mouth to call for help, but a cold kiss sealed her voice. The cold water and the cold body pressed down on her. Wei Bai was so cold that her face turned pale. Her teeth were trembling. Suddenly, something cold and soft pried opened her mouth and chewed on her. Rough, violent, and crazy. Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She used all her strength to push away the unknown object on her body. Chapter 423. But this action obviously put her in a worse situation. Eerie laughter sounded in her ears, and then Wei Bai was pressed into the water. Come accompany me, Wei Bai. That voice was shrill and mournful, and Wei Bai's head hurt even more. She couldn't breathe, and her neck was being strangled, and her chest was about to explode. Trash system, Slagstem, 004, trash system. System Daddy, save me. Unfortunately, the system was sleeping and ignored its host's pitiful cry for help. So Bai Wei was tossed around until she hovered between life and death. She thought she was going to drown, and a cold hand would pull her out of the water again, kiss her, touch her, and do all kinds of indescribable things to her. Except for the last step. Everything was done. Then she was pressed into the water again, and after a while, she was fished up again and tormented. That night she felt like she died a few times. Finally, she was able to open her eyes, and gasped for breath with her mouth open. Dizzily, she wanted to see what was molesting her. At first, she couldn't focus her eyes, and only saw a hazy white light, which was the light in the bathroom. Then she saw a blurry face, and she guessed that it should be Ji Yongxuan. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a ghost that was in such a hurry, as if it hadn't seen a woman in 800 years. She tried her best and planned to do it. Listen to me, you misunderstood me, my love. But before she could say anything, she saw Ji Yongchuan's withered face, which was filled with a greenish-gray aura of death, and his pupils were gone, only the whites of his eyes were visible, and he slowly revealed a creepy smile. Wei Bai, I won't let you go. Fine, there was no need to say anything. Wei Bai was so scared that she fainted. The next day, the rooster crowed, and the system finally woke up. It removed the shield, and saw its host sitting on the bed with a haggard face. She was in a daze, and there were dark circles under her eyes, as if she was about to die. The system was shocked. I only left for one night, and you couldn't sleep because you missed me? Wei Bai's lips twitched tiredly, but she couldn't say a word. The system was horrified. What was wrong with the host? Why wasn't the host rebuking it? This was too abnormal. Last night, I had an exceptionally ecstatic night. Wei Bai suddenly said sinisterly. System. The male lead is here? Wei Bai, I want to apply for a new male lead. The system said, don't do Dream of the Red Chamber. Wei Bai, I want to apply for a new male lead. The system said, hang in there, host. I know it's tough for you in this plane, but who doesn't? We're all just little screws trying to make a living. We'll get through it soon. Wei Bai was in despair. Ji Yongchuan is too ugly now. I can't take it anymore. Wei Bai hugged her head and shouted, it's so ugly. I feel so hopeless. Wei Bai threw a tantrum, I don't care. Change the male lead, change the male lead. She repeated this over and over again. The system silently plugged in its earplugs, refusing to see the host who only had the IQ of a fertilized egg. After Bai Wei finished venting her grievances, she finally returned to normal. She knew that Ji Yongchuan was definitely spying on her in the room, so she immediately got into character. She silently got up and wore her clothes. When she saw the ambiguous marks on her body, she started crying. She cried weakly and helplessly. Then she reached out and wiped her face. She turned around and rummaged through the cabinets to look for something. She found a lot of gathering treasures and placed them on the table. She set up the incense burner, lit the incense, and stared at it blankly. In the mirror behind her, a tall figure strangely appeared. He had black hair and a black robe. His face was abnormally pale and his eyes were terrifyingly dark. He saw her staring blankly at the offering table. Suddenly, he heard her sadly talking to herself. Is that you, little brother? Chapter 424. She couldn't explain herself. Wei Bai's face turned green from his cold fingers, and she felt like her chest was about to explode. She looked at Ji Yongchuan blankly. His long hair was messy, and his ugly face was filled with resentment. He looked like a malicious ghost coming to claim her life. Wei Bai didn't say anything, so she could only use her eyes. Her eyes were filled with sadness and guilt, without a trace of unwillingness or resentment. She used all her strength to slowly reach out, and her fingers gently touched his ugly face. Without a trace of disdain. Her fingertips gently caressed him. It was as if she was treating her most precious thing. Then she forced a smile and silently said, I'm sorry, little brother. Ji Yongchuan's fingers loosened, but he didn't let go. Wei Bai had already closed her eyes, and her breathing calmed down, just like a dead person. After an unknown amount of time, Ji Yongchuan's ghost face twisted in pain, and he slowly let go of his hand. Wei Bai's body softly fell, and silently leaned on his arm. The surrounding darkness became thicker, and only the two of them were snuggled up to each other. Ji Yongchuan's face began to change, his face turned white, and his eyes returned to normal, but they were too dark. In a short while, he had already returned to his handsome human appearance. A ghost king's original appearance was like this. That ugly appearance just now was because he knew that she was afraid of ugly ghosts, so he deliberately scared her. Her breathing was still intermittent, as if she was in pain. Ji Yongchuan's eyes were dyed with a trace of cold malice, and his fingernails grew longer. Just kill her. This thought kept reverberating in his mind. His return this time was because of this thought that supported him. The obsession was ingrained in his bones and couldn't be changed. His fingernails touched her chest, and under his fingernails, her trembling heartbeat was filled with warm vitality. If she died and became a resentful ghost, she would definitely hate him. Ji Yongchuan's face showed signs of struggle, and his sharp fingernails slowly disappeared. In the end, his hands hugged her. He buried his head deep into her chest, and he sneered in pain. "Don't lie to me, I won't believe you." Wei Weibai felt like she was boiling. His high fever did not subside, and even his breathing was hot. She complained to the system, "Sigh, this job is so hard. I'm being exploited like a cow or a horse. It's so torturous that I can't earn any money. Look at me now, I'm so hot that I'm about to puff up." The system said, "Hot? At least it proves that you're still alive." Wei Weibai, who had fainted from the heat, thought about it and said happily, "That's right, I'm still alive." System, "Poor child, you've been burned silly." Wei Weibai's fever did not subside. In her coma, she kept talking nonsense. An ice-cold hand gently covered her forehead. A satisfied smile appeared on her rosy face. It was like a cat that was content with its life. That hand hesitated for a moment before cruelly moving away. He seemed to want her to burn her brain. However, Wei Weibai frowned. She immediately frowned bitterly and waved her hands randomly. He seemed to be looking for something. In the air, there was a helpless and cold sigh. Then, that ghostly hand gently approached her again. She caught hold of his hand and placed it on her face. Then, she let out a comfortable murmur and rubbed against his palm very cutely. The soft warmth rubbed against his ice-cold skin, giving him a shivering feeling. Ji Yongchuan's dark eyes trembled slightly. He looked at her silently. A thick ghostly aura filled the room. Gradually, the ghostly aura settled and disappeared from the ground. The sunlight from outside the window could finally penetrate. Traces of light fell on the face of the girl in his arms. She was quiet and beautiful. The collect button below to record this reading record. Chapter 425. Ji Yongchuan let go of her and stood up. His black figure seemed lonely. He looked at her with a pale face. "It doesn't matter if you lie to me, you can't escape me anyway." After saying that, he staggered away. Halfway through, he remembered. The room was filled with ghostly air. It was very cold and harmful to the human body. She was not wearing any clothes. It would be very uncomfortable to curl up there. She might get sick. Ji Yongchuan could not move his feet. He reached out to wipe away the tears on his face. Just as he was about to turn around and help her put on her clothes, stumbling footsteps came from behind. He turned around just in time to catch a warm body. Then she hugged him tightly. She buried her head in his chest. A cry of despair sounded. "I like you. I can't lie to myself. I just like you. I can even be a sacrifice. If you don't want me, just kill me. How can I not like you?" His heart was about to explode from her words. His mind was blank. Ji Yongchuan felt suffocated for the first time. He did not need to breathe to live. But he felt the pain of suffocation. After the great sorrow, the great joy tore him to pieces. He felt as if his cold walls had been shattered, and cracks had appeared on the cold expression that he had been forcing himself to maintain. Finally, he hugged her and whispered in her ear, "Me too, I like you." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. The system's melancholy deepened. It took out a handful of popcorn. After eating a few, it could not help but sigh. What a pair of crazy people. It gave up on its pretentious host and the brainless male lead. Wei Weibai suddenly said, "Wait, there are only 3 days left?" The system said, "You slept for a few days. When you woke up, there were only 3 days left." Wei Weibai said, "That's too rushed." The system was expressionless. "Your acting is unparalleled. You are the only one in the world. There is nothing you can't do." Wei Weibai said, "Hee, that's true." The system, "You don't have to believe polite words. These are polite words." Ji Yongchuan picked up the clothes on the ground one by one and helped her put them back on. Wei Weibai sat quietly. After putting on his clothes, he buttoned up the best button and suddenly stopped in his tracks. After pausing for a while, Ji Yongchuan suddenly hugged her and buried his head in her shoulder. This action was fragile and dependent. Wei Wei, Hurry up and run. Wei Weibai was genuinely confused this time. Ghost Qi filled Ji Yongchuan's black eyes. His expression turned ferocious for a moment, but it was soon replaced by gentleness, making him look exceptionally terrifying. I'll open the door later and then open the passage to the outside world. Don't look back. Run straight to the human world. When he said this, the veins on his neck bulged. That familiar darkness was about to take over his body again. His obsession was too deep, so deep that he became a monster. Even he couldn't control himself. Suddenly, he felt something gentle fall on his hair. It was Wei Weibai's kiss. She lowered her head and kissed his hair with incomparable gentleness. Ji Yongchuan, I won't go. Even if I die, I won't leave you. Ji Yongchuan was angry and anxious. You should leave. I'm no longer your little big brother. I came out of the primal chaos land a second time and my obsession has turned into a demon. I will become an uncontrollable monster and kill you. When a ghost was stubborn to the bone, they would become resentful ghosts. He was now a resentful ghost. He was only relying on his love for her to hold on to a trace of clarity. Wei Weibai was silent for a moment before saying affectionately, "What's so good about humans and ghosts walking different paths? If you kill me, we can make a ghost mandarin duck." Ji Yongchuan's body trembled. He buried his face in her shoulder and didn't make a sound. But the affection increased. Ding, the affection has increased to 75. Wei Weibai revealed a smile and was about to continue saying more affectionate words. He suddenly said in a sinister voice, "Really? Wei Weibai, you're willing to be a ghost mandarin duck with me?" Wei Weibai opened her mouth and was about to shamelessly say, "Yes." He had already raised his head. His eyes were only white and filled with red veins. His face was green and ugly as he revealed a strange and crazy smile. "Me too. Every second, I crazily want to kill you and bind your soul to my side." Wei Weibai, what should she do if the target of the attack acts up? Chapter 426. Ji Yongchuan's bloodshot eyes had a strange madness in them. He chuckled, and the ghostly aura around him started to swirl. "You can only leave the Bai family after I kill you. Baiwen won't be able to make you leave me." Wei Weibai was always proud of her ability to lie to people and flirt with ghosts, but she was stuck for a moment. She forced a constipated expression and said, "Little brother, I won't leave you." Suddenly, she felt a chill in front of her chest. Ji Yongchuan's fingernails had dug into her chest. Wei Weibai was silent for a moment, and finally hugged the system and cried. "Tongzi, it's so scary. I can't hold on any longer." The system said earnestly, "Look at yourself. You'll know what retribution is after doing so many bad things. I told you not to be so heartless that even ghosts won't let you go. If you don't listen, what can I do as your father? Tell me." Wei Weibai said, "Give me a few talismans to drive the ghosts away. This face is too ugly." The system said, "I'll teach you a way, and you won't be afraid of ghosts anymore." Wei Weibai couldn't wait. "Please tell me." The system said, "If you do a little apple dance, the ghosts might like it and not want to kill you." Ha! Wei Weibai was speechless. She wanted to cut the system into 8 pieces. No matter how scared she was, Wei Weibai still insisted on maintaining her precarious persona. She looked at him sadly, and wanted to reach out and hold his face. But when she saw the color on his face and his eyes that were as scary as those in horror movies, she decided to go all out. Wei Weibai reached out and slapped his face. Then she hugged his face and said in a trembling voice, "Little brother, I love you. If you want to kill me, just kill me." His fingernails paused for a moment, and his stiff face seemed to be struggling and twisting. Wei Weibai was so scared that she wanted to cry. It was too fucking ugly. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her teeth trembled as she continued to hold on. We will be together forever. You will become a resentful ghost, and I will be the resentful ghost's wife, forever and ever. Damn it. Was there a mosaic on Ji Yongchuan's face? She would definitely be able to show off her affection. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. How could this increase favorability points? Wei Wei Bai was both scared and pleasantly surprised. For the sake of the favorable impression points, she didn't mind his funny face. The system suddenly said, life subsistence allowance activated? Wei Wei Bai, my HP? No, what for? As soon as she finished speaking, Ji Yongchuan kissed her lips. After his mutation, his lips were cold and tasteless. They were not soft, but hard. She stared blankly at his deathly pale ghost eyes. She was scared witless. And when his fingernails pierced through her chest and pierced into her heart, because his fingers trembled violently, they brushed past the side of her heart. Just a little bit more and it would have pierced through her heart. Ji Yongchuan was still kissing her. His face was struggling, but it was controlled by an even more terrifying possessiveness. If he killed her, he would be able to bind her here forever. She would forever be his. She said that she wanted to be his wife. However, in his mind, an intense thought sprang forth. You hurt her, you hurt her. This thought was like a sharp blade piercing through his heart. A trace of clarity appeared in Ji Yongchuan's eyes. He suddenly couldn't control his body from trembling violently. Wei Wei Bai couldn't move. She just sat there in a daze. Ji Yongchuan also pulled back his fingernails. Blood immediately gushed out from her chest. Chapter 427. Ji Yongchuan's fingers were holding the net. They were all burnt, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. He could only look at her with eyes wide open. He shouted helplessly, "Come back, we have other ways." The water had already reached her chest. She could barely stand. Her whole body was covered in ice. She looked very pitiful. But Wei Wei Bai was still smiling with difficulty. She didn't answer and just stood in the Wangchuan River. And the flower on her forehead was only left with faint petals. Those ghost hands were slowly approaching her. Wei Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. This mosaic function is not bad. To obtain this last bit of favorability, she used 5 days of her life points to purchase the one-button mosaic function from Patong. Although it could only last for 12 hours. But it was enough. Otherwise, if she saw so many ghosts, she would be so scared that her character setting would collapse at any moment. The mosaic function was complete. With one press, the dog head served. Looking up, those ghost hands, ghosts and so on turned into huskies sticking out their tongues. There were also cabbage heads, beautiful girls, cute little rabbits and other mosaic styles to choose from. She pressed a button and the ghosts turned into beautiful girls. With another press, they were all cabbage heads. Ah, fun. The system really wanted to strangle her. Be serious, you still have 10 points of affection left. Wei Wei Bai just remembered. That's right, the mission was not completed. She immediately adjusted her state and looked affectionately at Ji Yongchuan on the shore. She looked like she was in a daze from the cold and softly called, "Little brother." Ji Yongchuan looked at her crazily. "I'm here. Come back, okay, okay?" Every word was full of desperate pleading. At this time, he didn't have any dignity. He could only lie on the ground and stretch his scarred hand out of the net, closer to her. Closer. Ding, the male lead's affection is at 95. Wei Wei Bai seemed like she wanted to open her mouth and say yes, but she could only sigh and then stand helplessly in the Wangchuan River. Those ghosts rushed over. They surrounded her. She would be eaten and disappear completely. Ji Yongchuan's mind went blank for a moment. After overdrawing all of his strength, he finally used his tattered body to tear through the net and roll out. He didn't care about the state of his body, which was in the process of dissipating ghost chi, and staggered into the forgetful river. But there were too many ghosts in the river, he couldn't see where she was. Ji Yongchuan stretched out his hand to push the ghosts away, but when he pushed them away one by one, they surged forward again. It was endless. In a trance, he heard Wei Wei Bai's voice. "Little brother." Ji Yongchuan was shocked. "I'm here." He wanted to shout loudly, but he found that his neck had been broken by the net. Black ghost energy was coming out of his neck, and he couldn't speak at all. "Little brother," the sound became softer and softer. However, Ji Yongchuan was unable to answer her. He could only desperately search for her. In the river of forgetfulness, a tattered, lonely soul squeezed its way into the group of ghosts in the middle of the river. He looked miserable and pitiful. Suddenly he saw a pale hand among the ghosts. The wrist was slender, and there was a touch of pink on the fingertips. It was her hand. Ji Yongchuan grabbed the hand tightly and shouted silently, "Wei Wei, I'm here." Wei Wei Bai was drowned by ghosts. She looked at a pile of dog heads, but the ghosts couldn't tear her body. She spent 2 days of her life points to buy a substitute and let the substitute sacrifice for her. Anyway, the effect was about the same. Otherwise, the horrible experience of being eaten by ghosts, even if these ghosts were pixelated into dog heads, it was still scary to be eaten by dogs. Chapter 428. Qinqiu. Yushuan's expression was cramping? Why did she have such an expression? She had been expressionless for too long. Did she finally get a facial spasm? Qinqiu said cautiously, "Have you become a believer recently?" Her soul jumped out. The next sentence wouldn't be God creating the world, right? Yushuan quietly lowered her head, but her dark eyes stared at the hospital. "I know what her name is." Qinqiu couldn't react for a moment. "Who?" Yushuan whispered, Wei Wei Bai." These words were lightly bitten on her lips, carrying a trace of tenderness and deep affection. "I saw it. Her name is clearly written on the 3 Live Stone." On the 3 Life Stone, Ji Yongchuan's and Wei Wei Bai's names covered the entire stone, densely packed. It was the man in the dream who used his finger to write stroke by stroke. Every word was bloody, crazy, and sorrowful. A blood-red fog pervaded the air, and cold ghost energy wrapped around the entire bridge of helplessness. When the ghosts crossed the bridge, they trembled. On the 3 Live Stone, bloody strokes covered the entire greenish-gray stone. After years, the stone had almost turned blood-brown. Mengpo weighed the amount of Mengpo's soup with a spoon. "It's not enough again. You guys line up." These words made all the ghosts in the line angry and dissatisfied. But Mengpo's words made all the ghosts silent. Mengpo's soup was taken away by the Ghost King. "I can't do anything but boil it day and night." A new ghost was puzzled. Why does the Ghost King need so much Mengpo's soup? Mengpo raised her old eyes and looked at the river of forgetfulness. It said that if you don't reincarnate and don't reincarnate, you can exchange a lifetime of love for an infatuated ghost. In the blood-red river, a tall figure stood in the middle. A blood-red robe fluttered with the river. Mengpo turned back. But who can endure 1,000 years of torment in the river of forgetfulness? So they could only drink Mengpo's soup over and over again. He just wanted to forget about that woman for a second, to have a moment of peace. "Little brother," in the river, her smile was bright and lovely as she reached out to hold his hand. Ji Yongchuan stupidly reached out his hand, but all he touched was the ice-cold river water. Her face was shattered, and only her fragmented body was left. He stared blankly. The intense pain came from his limbs and bones. Every bone in his body was being tormented by the water of the forgetfulness river. The river was like a mirror projector. She kept showing him her best side. Once again, he used the cruelest method to shatter it before his eyes. Ji Yongchuan did not know how many years he had spent on the river of forgetfulness. Back then, he had killed all the ghosts that had feasted on her. To this day, the rivers of hell are red. Then he used the bones of hell, the accumulated resentment of all the ghosts, and the most terrifying method of summoning, but he still couldn't summon the soul he wanted. Later on, he tried all kinds of methods. They couldn't find her. He shouldn't have been unable to find it. Back then, he did not devour her soul. The reason why he could become a ghost king was because he had absorbed enough ghost energy. That was why her soul hadn't dissipated. Her soul should still be around. He didn't see her reincarnate. He didn't see her cross the bridge of helplessness. He didn't see her drink Mengpo's soup. He kept looking for those who had reincarnated in the mirror of the human world. He kept looking for his familiar back among those new ghosts. He had been disappointed too many times, to the point of despair. Ji Yongchuan chose the most hopeless path. Like those useless ghosts, he kept soaking in the water of the river of forgetfulness. It was said that soaking for 1,000 years could be exchanged for a lifetime of love. Even if it was a lifetime of 100 years, as long as they could be together, he would be willing to soak in this river for 10,000 years. Full text download. Chapter 429. But he knew about this legend. It was just a lie left behind by the ghost of the river of forgetfulness. No matter how many years he soaked in it, he still couldn't meet her in this life. Ji Yongchuan was willing to soak in the river every day just to see her. The river would repeatedly show the best and cruelest side of the person he loved the most, repeatedly tormenting the ghost of the river of forgetfulness. Many ghosts broke down like this. Every time Ji Yongchuan was about to break down, he would climb ashore and drink Meng Po's soup. Meng Po sometimes complained that he drank too much and refused to give him. He would beat her until she gave him. After a long time, the ghosts crossing the bridge would see the bright red scenery. The Ghost King was wearing a red robe and silver armor. His black hair was tied up high, and he held a bottle full of Meng Po's soup in his hand. He sat beside the three-life stone and used his finger to write a name on the stone. Ji Yongchuan. Wei Bai. The two names were densely packed together. His 10 fingers were covered in blood, and one could see the white bones between the mangled flesh. Or, he saw the Ghost King soaking in the river and staring blankly at the water, as if he was thinking of someone. When Baiwen passed by the Bridge of Helplessness, he saw Ji Yongchuan staring blankly at the three-life stone. He was writing names while drinking Meng Po's soup. Baiwen was indifferent and asked for soup from Meng Po. Meng Po helplessly used the spoon to scoop up half a bowl for Baiwen. Baiwen saw that she was hesitating and frowned. Only half a bowl. Do you want me to be half a ghost slayer from the moment I was born? What could he forget with half a bowl? Meng Po looked at him indifferently. It's okay. You have no worries in your life and your mind is clear. Half a bowl is enough to make you forget everything. Baiwen felt like she was calling him an idiot. Baiwen took the soup and walked to Ji Yongchuan's side. He said coldly, Ji Yongchuan? Ji Yongchuan ignored him and continued drinking Meng Po's soup. Baiwen was calm. Give me some soup. Ji Yongchuan didn't even turn his head. After he finished a bottle of Meng Po's soup, he finally remembered who was next to him. Then Baiwen saw him, reached out his hand, and snatched the pitiful half bowl and drank it. Baiwen. After Ji Yongchuan finished drinking, he continued to use the bone in his hand to write his name on the three-live stone. Baiwen could only wait for Meng Po to cook the soup again. He calmly watched Ji Yongchuan's self-harming actions. My niece became a sacrifice because of you. I should have taken revenge on you, but seeing you like this, I feel that your life is more painful than having your soul destroyed, so I'll leave you be. Ji Yongchuan remained silent. Baiwen waited for a few days until the soup was ready. Just as he was about to drink it, he thought of something. I was born with the heaven's eye, but I've never used it in my life. The heaven's eye can see through this world and search for souls. Ji Yongchuan stood up and grabbed Baiwen's collar, slamming him into a rock. His eyes were bloodshot and vicious. Quick, find out where she is. Baiwen held the soup with one hand, afraid that it would spill. He was too lazy to argue with a fool like Ji Yongchuan. He undid the seal on his left eye with one hand. The color of his eye was a strange white. Suddenly, the white turned into a strange blue. The blue slowly turned thicker, and finally returned to white. Baiwen frowned, looking puzzled. Her soul has disappeared. She's not here. There's no trace of her in the world of ghosts, immortals, Buddhas, or anything else. You can't wait for her. Give up. Ji Yongchuan's hope turned into despair. His gloomy eyes were trembling violently. I don't believe it. I didn't devour her soul. It's impossible that she's not here. Chapter 430. Bai Wen smiled faintly, drank the soup in his hand indifferently, and then went to reincarnate. Leaving Ji Yongchuan in the ghost world, he continued to search for that non-existent soul. He didn't know how long he had been searching, but when he suddenly fell into the Wangchuan River one day, a familiar feeling attacked his heart. He seemed to have been searching like this all along. Not only in this life, but in many, many lives. He had been waiting for her, looking for her all along. He found despair and madness, dying a horrible death in every life, lonely and paranoid. New and old ghosts came and went on the bridge of helplessness, and Mengpa quietly served soup to these ghosts. Her soup could make any ghost forget this life and previous life. Only it didn't work on him. She looked over and saw a red robe still hanging on the 3 Lives stone. And the master had disappeared. After he fell into the Wangchuan River, no ghost saw him again. Mengpa belatedly remembered that the Ghost King had been soaking in the Wangchuan River for thousands of years. His soul had scattered. It was unknown who sighed faintly. On the 3 Life stone, their names, with bloody affection, still existed. After Qin Qiu heard this, his brain crashed for a while, and then he said, "This is what it means to dream of what you think of in the day. You like Wei Wei Bai, so you dream of her name. Isn't this a very normal thing?" Yi Yuxuan's eyes were tired. That dream almost exhausted all his strength. After waking up, it was as if he had completely experienced the process of his soul scattering. That thick sadness and madness still remained in his body. And he found that even though it was so painful, he still couldn't understand 1% of the true feelings of the man in the dream. Yi Yuxuan had a strange feeling, as if he broke some barrier. He might be crushed by the madness and misery of every dream. I have a vague guess. What if those dreams were 3 lives and 3 lives of me with her? Yi Yuxuan lowered his thick eyelashes, and under his half-closed eyelids, only a faint breathtaking light could be seen. Qin Qiu's face was dull. 3 lives and 3 lives, what a weirdo. But as a normal person, he must resist the urge to complain. Maybe, Qin Qiu felt that such an awkward, such a childish conversation, was there really no problem? His conversation style with Yi Yuxuan. "Uncle Qin, I have a headache recently. It's probably caused by the lack of blood supply to the brain after staying up late for 3 days and 3 nights. Give me some vitamins. Blah 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 blah." Yi Yuxuan's expression was incomparably paralyzed. "You wasted 5 minutes of my time. If you waste another minute, I won't fund your hospital." This was their normal conversational style. The style of his conversation with Yi Yuxuan changed. Qin Qiu said, Good. Yi, I have a child with her. I have 3 lives and 3 lives with her. How can you say such shameful lines?" What kind of tragic things had happened to their conversation that caused it to become so crooked? Yi Yuxuan was still in the middle of his awkward lines. "I even suspect that she will leave me in this life, and I don't know where she went. Life after life, she left him. There was never an exception." Chapter 431. Qin Qiu said weakly, No. Wei Wei is still in the hospital." Suddenly, he thought of something and said happily, "When I came back from the hospital, I heard Wei Wei Bai say that she has feelings for you." Yi Yuxuan didn't react. Just when Qin Qiu thought that he would be paralyzed. Suddenly, Yi Yuxuan's thin lips opened slightly. "What did you say?" Qin Qiu was stunned. "Wei Wei Bai said that she has feelings for you." Yi Yuxuan asked very calmly, "How special?" Qin Qiu said, "Usually, when a woman says that she has feelings for a man, it means that she likes him." Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes trembled slightly, and the light in his eyes intensified. His expression was very calm, but his fingers couldn't help but clench. This was excitement. This feeling was excitement. Yi Yuxuan suddenly stood up and walked towards the hospital with his long legs. Meanwhile, Matchmaker Qiu was baffled. Why did she leave just like that? How rude. Bai Weiwei tried every possible way to appease her old man. Don't cancel the engagement first. After observing Yi Yuxuan for a while, she would make plans. She drank some soup and warmed her hands and feet. Finally, she felt that she could move freely. Bai Changyan saw that his precious daughter had woken up. Even though her body was still weak, her spirit was especially good. He said happily, "When you're better, we still need you to make decisions about the company." He had already told her about Bai Yaoyao's situation with a sad expression. After Bai Yaoyao was seriously injured, she was taken away by someone. Wei Wei Bai thought that Enla took her away. However, she was exhausted now. She had to deal with her trash sister when she had more time in the future. Wei Wei Bai nodded naturally. "Yes, I will reorganize the company. Without her, those old fogies might come back to control the company again." Suddenly, the system reminded her, "Yi Yuxuan is here." Bai Weiwei was frightened, and her whole body entered a super alert state. She said to Bai Changyan, "Dad, I'm going out for a while." Bai Changyan's face was full of love. "All right, go and rest." Weiwei Bai immediately walked out, and the system notified, 30 meters away from you, 20 meters, 10 meters, just around the corner, the energy feedback is starting. Weiwei Bai suddenly stopped in her tracks. In front, Yi Yuxuan's footsteps were slightly hurried as he walked over. His slender legs moved gracefully and calmly. Under his black hair, his handsome face was simply eye-catching. His face was calm, and he had a natural noble charm. Even Weiwei Bai was dazzled for a moment. Of course, it was only for a moment. She was already prepared to run because she couldn't think of a big move to provoke Yi Yuxuan. He had kissed her, taken off her clothes, and was just short of sleeping with her. Even if he wanted to sleep now, this place was too difficult. So Weiwei Bai gave up on this shameless decision. But when Yi Yuxuan was less than a meter away from her, the system was surprisingly silent. Not deducting her precious life points? Or was it that their similar auras were no longer similar? The system then spoke, "Yi Yuxuan is very excited now, and it's because of you, so both of your auras are equal. If you don't deduct your life points, you won't get any benefits." Weiwei Bai was at a loss. What did she do to make Yi Yuxuan so excited? Under the soft light, in the white corridor, Yi Yuxuan looked up and saw that she was not far away. She was wearing a hospital gown, and her thin body was a little weak. It was as if she sensed his arrival. Her gentle face turned slightly, and there was a trace of confusion in her clear eyes. Yi Yuxuan stopped in his tracks. His indifferent expression finally had a ripple. Then Weiwei Bai heard his calm and hoarse voice. "I heard that you like me? Crossover system, Adonis, come over here." Chapter 432. I heard that you like me? Weiwei Bai was stunned. Who said that? The system said, "Excitement is rising. Increase the stimulation. I'm ready to fish for as long as I can." Weiwei Bai rolled up her sleeves and wanted to go all out. Who cared who said it? He was a good person and should be rewarded. She took a deep breath and looked up. She smiled affectionately and was about to say, "Yes." Yi Yuxuan rushed up to her, grabbed her arm and pushed her against the wall. "Kabadan." Weiwei Bai's smile froze. Her eyes flashed with surprise. He had already lowered his head. A few strands of black hair fell to his eyes, giving off a sense of evil. "Tell me the truth." Her expression changed too slowly. She was holding her breath, blushing and smiling. They were all forced. He did not like it. Weiwei Bai's lips trembled. She looked up calmly. She said honestly, "Let go of me." Bai Weiwei felt as if Yi Yuxuan's entire body was shrouded over her. He grabbed her shoulder and held the wall beside her ear with his other hand. This posture was especially oppressive. She did not like it. Yi Yuxuan's expression was as calm as usual. When he heard her words, his breathing became erratic. His grip tightened. His eyelashes fluttered. His tone became oppressive. "You like me?" Was this a question? Or a statement? Weiwei Bai seriously thought about her performance. Was it not skillful enough? Or was her expression too outdated? She blinked and smiled shyly. Then she looked away and did not say anything. He wanted to refuse but gave up. He wanted to speak but stopped. She was natural and not pretentious. Yi Yuxuan was expressionless. "Is it hard to answer?" "I'll answer for you." Weiwei Bai smiled shyly. Could someone answer for her whether she liked it or not? Yi Yuxuan's incomparably indifferent expression did not change in the slightest. Only a pair of deep eyes stared fixedly at her. Then he whispered, "You forced a kiss on me? Wei Wei Bai, I have nothing to say." His eyes flickered and his expression changed slightly. "You even took off your clothes for me to see. Wei Wei Bai, that makes sense?" Yi Yuxuan paused for a few seconds and said in a low voice, "But you don't like me." Bai Weiwei looked up. Her eyes were watery, with a few traces of hazy mist and a hint of affection. "No, I actually like you very much," a slender index finger pressed against her soft lips. Weiwei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. She could clearly see Yuxuan's deep eyes. There was a hint of heat in them. His voice was slightly hoarse, and his words were restrained with indifference. "No, you don't like it?" She was silent for a moment and seemed a little annoyed. She frowned slightly and could not help but bite her lips lightly. Her lips darkened a little. Her eyes, however, were still extremely bright, as if she was thinking of something that no one knew about. Yi Yuxuan's gaze softened. He was restrained and cold. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai tiptoed. Yi Yuxuan was stunned. He saw the indifference in her eyes clearly, but he did not avoid it. It was a light kiss, like a dream, with her delicate scent on his lips. Yi Yuxuan only heard a thump in his heart, as if something had smashed it heavily. His lips trembled, but he did not have time to taste anything deeper. She moved away from his lips again. Her eyes were slightly red, and there was a seductive smile at the corner of her mouth. Yi Yuxuan looked at her with a tense expression and his breathing became heavy. Wei Wei Bai said softly beside his lips, "If this doesn't count as liking, then what do you think is liking?" Chapter 433. Her breathing as she spoke intertwined with his breathing, forming a blurred sense of seduction. But he still had the same expression. He looked at her coldly and condescendingly. Only his hand that was supporting the wall firmly clasped the wall. His eyes darkened a little. Wei Wei Bai was a little scared by his gaze and knocked on the system. "Is the excitement level high?" The system held the net expressionlessly. "No, I have never seen a person who can maintain the same level of excitement and then not fluctuate. This is not like a human, it's like a machine." Wei Wei Bai. "I think he's like a robot too." She had felt it before, but now it was barely fluctuating. It was also very abnormal. Wei Wei Bai was a little depressed. What was a robot strategy? Waiting online, urgent. She thought for a while and tried to reach out her hand, softly hugging his waist. The man's waist was surprisingly strong. Because he was wearing a suit, it was a little hard to tell if there was any excess fat. Wei Wei Bai instinctively pinched it. It was hard. Yi Yuxuan was stiff in the same position, but his breathing was heavier, as if he was enduring something. His excitement should be rising, Bai Weiwei thought blankly. Or should it go further? She gathered her courage and hugged his waist with her fingers. She shamelessly rubbed her whole body into his arms, her face on his chest, and squeezed out a smile. "I really like you. Otherwise, why would I kiss and hug you?" After so many worlds, she had already become a super experienced driver. She hugged and kissed when she wanted to. She was not soft at all. Yi Yuxuan was silent. Suddenly, she felt the body of the man she was hugging relax, as if he had accepted his fate. Then a series of life points notifications came. Remaining life points, 42 days, 43 days, 44 days. Wei Wei Bai wished she could turn into a giant octopus glue and stick to him fiercely. Life points were an ATM machine. Hugging for a minute was more than the reward of doing work in 10 worlds. 47 days, 55 days. Why wasn't there a transition in 55 days? Wei Wei Bai was shocked by the increase. Then, before she could figure it out, Tang Emo said she was pushed away by Yi Yuxuan. Her hands were held high above her head by him. Wei Wei Bai raised her head and saw that his dark eyes were terrifyingly deep. There was a cold sharpness in them that seemed to be choosing people to devour. "Are you dreaming?" Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. "Dream?" His voice lowered. "I don't like dreams, but you do." What did she like? Wei Wei Bai was about to ask when he tightened his grip on her wrists, causing her to struggle uncontrollably. His other hand firmly clasped her chin, leaned over, thin lips coldly said, "In the future, you are not allowed to like anyone, just look at me." These words were cold and domineering. All the men in her dreams could have her love. He only felt a strange and unbearable feeling rising in his chest, as if he was being torn apart. Maybe it was jealousy, maybe it was. In any case, it was an emotion that he had never experienced before, causing him to become ugly and impulsive. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai wanted to avoid a man's gaze. It was cold and restrained, as if there was a terrifying darkness curling up, causing people to instinctively feel afraid. She couldn't retreat, so she could only turn her face. The curve of her neck was weak and pale, with a trace of imperceptible resistance. Yi Yuxuan only felt that the string in his heart had snapped. He suddenly released the hand that was clasping her chin. Wei Wei Bai didn't hear the increase in excitement. He also clasped her hand, not reacting at all. She looked at him tentatively and hesitantly. Chapter 434. But she saw him loosening the tie on his collar with one hand, revealing his sexy Adam's apple. When his fingers slid over his Adam's apple, there was a trace of lust. His next action was suddenly fierce. He held the back of her head and grabbed her arm with one hand. Then he pulled her soft body into his embrace. Then he lowered his head, captured her lips, and kissed her fiercely. He roughly pried open her lips and tongue, and domineeringly and forcefully sucked her breath. This kiss was like a storm, with a desperate desire to destroy, forcing her to be indifferent. Wei Wei Bai was shocked by his terrible attack. She reflexively wanted to struggle, but found that his embrace was even more confining. Not to mention struggling, she couldn't even lift her hand. Her breath was taken away, and her breath was messily intertwined with another man's strong breath. Wei Wei Bai's vision blurred, and her head spun. Only his kiss occupied all her thoughts. Wet, greedy, deep, she even felt that the skin that was touching his body was so hot that it was about to burn. Her heart suddenly hurt. And the favorability notifications continued. 65 days, 70 days? She was in pain and excited, and her heart was beating fast. She felt like she was going to die. Wei Wei Bai's hand grabbed his clothes fiercely, and her eyes lost focus. In a blur, she only saw Yi Yuxuan's deep eyes, with a burning fire, as if to burn her. She softened. The system's voice sounded. Detected that there is a problem with the host's life. The newbie gift package is activated, and you have received 3 days of vegetative life. Wei Wei Bai's heart disease relapsed. Yi Yuxuan let go of her, and found that her face was covered in sweat, her face was pale, and her eyes were closed. She leaned softly in his arms. He half-hugged her, pursed his lips, looked at her for half a second, and suddenly put his hand on her chest. "You should like me now." Her heartbeat sped up for him. Suddenly, someone rushed out from the corner, and Qin Qiu shouted crazily, "My big brother, she has a heart attack. Quick, quick, send her to the emergency room." Yi Yuxuan's eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. The door next door opened and Bai Changyan frowned as he poked his head out. Who's having a heart attack? His daughter had a heart attack, so he was very sensitive when he heard about it. Qin Qiu's footsteps paused, and his face changed greatly. Bai Changyan also felt that something was wrong and turned his head to look. He saw that Yi Yuxuan's breathing was chaotic. His collar was open, and his tie was hanging loosely. He looked like a beast in human clothing. In his arms, Wei Wei Bai was leaning on him softly with her head tilted to one side. Bai Changyan looked at the beast's hand that was still on his daughter's chest. The scene was silent for a while. Matchmaker Qin and Mr. Bai were silent for 2 seconds. Yi Yuxuan had already reacted quickly. He carried Bai Weiwei and quickly ran in the direction of the emergency room. Qin Qiu reached out his hand. "Don't leave me behind." The next moment, old man Bai grabbed Qin Qiu's neck. "Quick, my daughter was taken away by a beast. I want to call the police to arrest him." The police were useless. Qin Qiu almost fainted. Fortunately, Bai Changyan also regained his senses and immediately let go of his hand. Then the two people staggered and chased after them. They ran to the emergency room. They were told that Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai were in the emergency room. Bai Changyan also wanted to go in. Several nurses and doctors stopped him. "You can't go in if you're not a patient. You'll disturb the emergency treatment." Bai Changyan was indignant. "How can that dirty and shameless bastard Yi Yuxuan go in? My daughter is still in his hands." Chapter 435. A nurse said, "He needs first aid too." Bai Changyan asked, "Which part of him needs first aid?" The nurse was silent for a while before saying, "He said that his heart needs first aid." Both Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu were confused. The nurse continued, "Mr. Yi said that because he was too excited, his adrenaline secretion increased, dopamine surged, and other hormones increased. He needs to stay by Miss Bai's side to stabilize his condition." Old Father Bai was even more confused. "What kind of illness is this?" Qin Qiu. "Love disease." Wei Wei Bai clutched her chest. It was heavy and painful. She did not expect that she would have a heart attack after being kissed. "Tongzi, I feel like I'm going to die." The system said, "You can still live. Let me count, 82 days. Wei Wei Bai, 82 days? The system said, "That's the life points I got from Yi Yuxuan." Wei Wei Bai was excited. "I can't believe I got so much. I have so much life points now." The system said, "If you weren't so excited and had a heart attack, I would have gotten you 100 days. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm so excited because I was kissed? Clearly, I should be feeling calm." The system said, "You can't turn on the emotion blocker in reality. It would be weird if you weren't excited." Wei Wei Bai communicated with the system for a while before falling asleep again. After some time, she finally woke up. The bright light was above her head. She rubbed her temples. It hurt. Her brain felt like it was hit by a hammer. She forced herself to open her sore eyes. Her eyes were out of focus for a while before she could see clearly. There was another man sleeping quietly on a white pillow. His breathing was steady, his black hair covered half of his face, and his beautiful and delicate jawline was faintly visible. Most of the blanket was outside the bed. Only a corner of the blanket was left, covering his butt. Wei Wei Bai forced herself to sit up and saw the man's white and strong back and thin and strong waist. She was silent for a moment before lowering her head. Sure enough, she saw that she was lying naked beside him. Wei Wei Bai carefully reached out, grabbed the blanket on his butt, and slowly moved it to her body. Just as she covered her body with the blanket, someone grabbed her wrist. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled. She saw that the man who had been sleeping on his stomach had turned to his side. However, his hand was still gripping her wrist tightly, refusing to let go. He didn't seem to have woken up yet. His thick eyelashes trembled as he opened his sleepy eyes. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Morning." He seemed to be startled. The drowsiness in his eyes was swept away, and he sharply woke up. "Who are you?" "Wei Wei Bai. She also wants to know who she is." However, the system seemed to have disconnected and didn't say anything. He had just thought of that. The system's voice rang out. "This mission is to obtain Lu Zixi love. Target, Lu Zixi. Progress, 0. Time, 6 months." Lu Zixi raised his head and looked around, then at the extremely messy bed. He raised the corners of his eyes, and a faint layer of anger covered them. He sneered. "So it's another shameless bed climber." With that, Lu Zixi got up and walked into the bathroom with his naked body. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. It was only -10. He wasn't excited at all. Wei Wei Bai was still confused. "Where's the memory? Did you forget to pay for the broadband? Why do you keep disconnecting?" System, "I'm hungry. I've been malnourished recently, so I often feel like my energy is lacking." Wei Wei Bai hesitated. "Why don't you go to the cafeteria and get a meal to eat?" The system was silent for a while before it was moved. "You're so generous?" Wei Wei Bai, "Am I such a stingy host?" Both host and system fell into awkward silence. Fortunately, There was an automatic reminder to break this unspeakable awkwardness. Please accept the memory, host. The familiar headache came. After accepting the memory, Wei Wei Bai hesitated. So, in this world I'm going to have a forbidden love. Chapter 436. Lu Zishi finished showering and came out wrapped in a towel. His broad shoulders, narrow hips, and strong legs were like a moving aphrodisiac, making people unable to control themselves. He faintly glanced at the woman on the bed. Last night, he got drunk and went to bed with a woman he didn't know. Just thinking about it made him sick. You're a new artist in the company, right? Which movie do you want the female lead for? Just say the word and we'll call it even. With that, he turned his back to Wei Wei Bai and smoothly put on his clothes. Suddenly, a small hand softly tugged at the corner of his clothes. Lu Zishi coldly narrowed his eyes, his expression indifferent. Let go. Don't push your luck. He'd seen too many greedy women. It was simply unappetizing. This was also why he never touched women in the entertainment industry. Last night was Tian Na Corporation's 25th anniversary. All the artists and people from the entertainment industry were present. He drank a few more glasses and woke up in a daze to see a strange woman lying next to him. At this moment, he felt like he'd eaten a fly. A female lead was generous enough to send her away. If she wanted more, he could raise his hand and freeze her. The owner of the small hand seemed frightened. Her fingers trembled violently. Finally, she choked out, "Uncle, I won't report you. Can you not tell anyone?" "Uncle?" Lu Zishi's eyes turned cold. He turned his head, but saw the strange woman on his bed, a girl. She had her head down. Her body was wrapped in the sheets, revealing nothing. A few strands of her long black hair were sticking up. Her fingers gently tugged at his clothes. She appeared exceptionally well behaved. She sobbed, "Don't tell anyone." If my mother knew that I was sleeping with an old man, she seemed to find this sentence very shameful. A thin layer of pink stained the back of her ears. "She'll kill me." "Old man." Lu Zishi's face darkened. Suddenly, she glanced up at him. Her large almond eyes were filled with panicked tears. Her soft white skin didn't have a trace of blemish. She looked abnormally young and pure, full of the aura of a young girl. She held on, but she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. "I beg you, uncle, don't tell anyone." Lu Zishi was a little confused. "How old are you? Did he sleep with an underage girl?" Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. "It was my birthday yesterday. I just turned 18. Only then did Lu Zishi relax. Fortunately, she wasn't underage. However, 18 wasn't that old. If it was sold at such a young age, it definitely wouldn't be anything good. Lu Zishi fiercely shook off her hand. "All right, stop pretending to be pitiful. Remember to find your agent and have him report to me." Wei Wei Bai staggered a few steps, stepped on the sheets, and directly sat on the ground. Lu Zishi had already walked to the door. He opened it and casually turned his head to take a look. Then he saw her bewildered look. Her white and soft skin was so delicate that it could be broken with a single blow. Her innocent expression was so cute that it seemed like she didn't know anything. Lu Zishi didn't know why, but this was the first time such a small girl had climbed into his bed. He frowned and turned to leave. As soon as the door closed, Wei Wei Bai jumped up from the ground. "Tongzi, I think that if Lu Zishi knew that I was his sister, he would probably beat me to death." "System, which male lead didn't want to beat you to death in the beginning?" Wei Wei Bai thought about it. She didn't know if it was because of the system shielding, but her memory of all the planes she had conquered was a little fuzzy. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 437. But in these vague memories, yes, almost all the male leads did want to beat her to death. After digesting the memories this time, Wei Wei Bai felt that the scale was a bit too big. saying that she was Lu Zixi's sister didn't really count. This involved the previous generation's dog blood grudges. Wei Wei Bai's mother was called Bai Ziwen. When she was young, she was a small-time actress in the entertainment circle. She was beautiful and ambitious. After a while, she hooked up with Lu Zixi's father, Lu Renjia. Then she got pregnant and gave birth to a daughter. Lu Renjia had a wife, the only daughter of the director of the entertainment circle's leading company. Because Lu Renjia cheated, she couldn't take it anymore and took the 7-year-old Lu Zixi to jump off a building. Lu Zixi survived, but his mother died miserably. After so many years, Lu Renjia died long ago. Lu Zixi took over his grandfather's and his father's career and became the new leader of the entertainment circle. He could call the wind and summon the rain in the entertainment circle. And Bai Ziwen was more miserable. After Lu Zixi's mother died, she was afraid of revenge. She left with her daughter, who was only 2 years old. Because of neglect, her daughter died of a high fever. Bai Ziwen still had hope in her heart to return to the Lu family. Her daughter was her only bargaining chip. She refused to give up and went to the orphanage to adopt the original owner, who was similar to her daughter. She thought that if there was an opportunity, she would take the fake Wei Wei Bai to acknowledge her ancestors. But before she could go back, Lu Renjia died. Without a backer, Bai Ziwen could only temporarily put her plan on hold, thinking that she would go back when she had the chance. But for various reasons, she didn't succeed even when the original owner grew up. Bai Ziwen finally gave up on this unrealistic plan. She also decided not to raise the original owner, who was a money loser. Last night, on the original owner's birthday, Bai Ziwen took the money. Then she got her drunk and threw her into the room of a fat, short, and ugly director. The original owner was smart enough to stumble and run away. She directly broke into Lu Zixi's hotel room. Then she directly lay down and slept next to Lu Zixi, who was also drunk and sleeping like a dead pig. Both of them had the habit of sleeping naked. Well, that was how the misunderstanding started. Wei Wei Bai wrapped herself in a blanket and went to take a shower. She decided to sort out this complicated relationship and then think about how she should approach him. After taking a shower, she asked the hotel service staff to buy her a new set of clothes. When she was packing up the original owner's things, she saw the phone. Many of the calls were from his mother. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while before calling her back. As soon as the call connected, Bai Ziwen's cold voice sounded. "Where did you go last night? Do you know how angry Director Lin is? How are you going to debut like this, blah blah blah." The woman's voice was as sharp as a noise. Wei Wei Bai had already put her phone aside and let her vent. Then, she leisurely picked up a nail clipper and began to trim her nails. When she was almost done, Wei Wei Bai picked up the phone again. "He's already dead. Why aren't you saying anything? Forget it, I won't force you anymore." Bai Ziwen's voice suddenly softened. Bai Wei Wei reviewed her memories. This woman wasn't someone who was easy to talk to. "Sure enough," Bai Ziwen said, "you know Lu Zixi, right?" Wei Wei Bai cleared her throat and quickly got into character. Her voice was soft and timid. "Yes, mother, I know." Bai Ziwen shouted excitedly, "This is your brother. He is the CEO of Tianna. We are going to be rich." Wei Wei Bai. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here Transmigration system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 438. Didn't Bai Ziwen give up on the idea of returning to the family? Bai Ziwen thought she was shocked, so she held back her excitement and said coldly, "Okay, pack up. We'll go and return to the family tomorrow." She hung up the phone. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time before asking the system, "What happened?" The system flipped through the information and sent her a short memory of Bai Ziwen. Wei Wei Bai glanced at it and found that Bai Ziwen had entrusted it to an old lover of hers. It was a manager of the Liu family who had started to fake a DNA paternity test. She planned to blackmail Liu Zishi. She wanted to split the Liu family's assets. After all, she had been jealous of such a big entertainment company like Tian Na for a long time. She waited until now to blackmail him. It was only now that Bai Ziwen found someone who was willing to take the risk for her and fake a paternity test. Wei Wei Bai's face was paralyzed. Tongzi, I've never seen such a sick mother. The system said, it's not that the mother is a scum, it's that the scum became the mother. Just put up with it. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while, no, if I really become Liu Zishi's sister, even if Liu Zishi doesn't strangle me, he won't be able to conquer me. Most people don't like incest. So she had to think of a way to destroy this paternity test. Make an anonymous call and tell the Liu family that the paternity test was fake? That should be a good idea. Wei Wei Bai was just thinking about it when the system's voice rang out. Have you ever dreamed of him silently turning on a lamp for you, keeping watch for you alone? Have you ever seen him bending down to carry you on his back when the road was soft in the heavy rain? Have you ever, Wei Bai said, ever your sister, just spit it out. Are you trying to cheat me of my money? The system immediately said, the good brother and good sister side mission has been activated. Please don't let the male lead find out that you are not biological siblings before you complete the mission. If the side mission fails, the host will run around the Earth's equator naked. Does the host accept the side mission? Yes, the host accepts. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She had already given up on this bandit side quest. Running around the equator naked? Was she a fragrant milk tea? Wei Wei Bai sighed deeply and looked haggard. Compared to running around the world naked, she suddenly realized that she was going to do something like German orthopedics with her brother. It wasn't that difficult. The next day, Bai Ziwen appeared in a flirtatious red dress and sunglasses. She was in her late 40s and maintained herself well. She was curvaceous in front and behind, incomparably alluring. Let's go. Bai Ziwen dragged Wei Wei Bai into the car. Your brother is now talking to someone in the bamboo pavilion in the south of the city. If you go there now, you can still see him. Bai Ziwen was extremely anxious. The paternity test had been sent over. Her old lover also said that the Liu family admitted that Wei Wei Bai was Liu Renjia's daughter. But Liu Zishi didn't intend to recognize them. Bai Ziwen had done so many things. How could she give up? Furthermore, she still owed a huge debt at the casino. If she couldn't enter the Liu family, she would be hacked to death by the people at the casino. She didn't have any way out. The bamboo pavilion was the best private restaurant in the city. It was impossible to enter unless one was powerful. Bai Ziwen could even bribe the waiter of the restaurant and sneak in with Wei Wei Bai. When you see your brother later, pounce on him, hug him, and call him brother. Bai Ziwen pinched her hand hard. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. She lowered her eyes and looked coldly at her hand. Chapter 439. Do you remember? We can't fail. Wei Wei Bai finally nodded. Yes, Mum. Bai Ziwen immediately smiled. Wei Wei is the best. Wei Wei Bai. Hee. With this kind of mother, she really wanted her to fly. Liu Zishi was currently discussing a new movie to invest in with the great director, Xiao Yi. When the discussion was almost over, Xiao Yi smiled and said, "Why don't you be the male lead this time? You haven't appeared on the screen since you left the industry after winning the Best Actor award at the age of 20. Liu Zishi's eyebrows were deep. The mottled shadow of the bamboo at the door fell on his handsome face. For a moment, it was so breathtaking that it made people stop breathing. He was incomparably indifferent. The company's matters are busy enough. I don't need to go out and show my face. He entered the entertainment industry at the age of 15 and muddled along until he won the Best Actor award at the age of 20. It was only to understand the operations of the entertainment industry better when he took over the company. Xiao Yi was somewhat regretful. It's really hard to find a male lead with the same qualifications as you. Liu Zishi casually lit a cigarette. Take your time. You'll find that it's not really hard to find someone with the same qualifications as me, but impossible. After he finished speaking, he suddenly saw a white figure from the corner of his eye. It was like déjà vu. It seemed to be the girl who woke up in his bed the night before yesterday. Until today, she hadn't asked her agent to come and ask for a reward. Lu Zishi thought of her white and soft skin. Under the light, it was sparkling and translucent. And the look in her eyes when she looked at him was innocent and soft. In hindsight, she reeked of alcohol. Perhaps she was forced into his bed. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to -5. Wei Weibai heard the notification, although she didn't know how the favorability rose. But when she called him brother later, Lu Zishi's favorability would probably plummet. -20 or -30 wouldn't be a problem. But when she thought of running around the world naked, even if it was -100, she had to brace herself. Suddenly, two figures walked in front of her. She didn't recognize one of them. The other was Lu Zishi. Wei Weibai hesitated for half a second. Sooner or later he was going to be her brother. Procrastination was not her style. Wei Weibai rushed forward a few steps, abruptly reached out, and fiercely hugged Lu Zishi. Lu Zishi's entire body stiffened. Before he could react, he heard the girl in his arms call out to him clearly and sweetly. Brother! Lu Zishi was at a loss for a few seconds. Wei Weibai buried her head in his chest and hugged him tightly. Her soft body squeezed into his embrace. Lu Zishi could even feel the soft warmth of her chest pressing against him. Her voice trembled slightly. Brother. The way she called him Big Brother was very sweet and gentle. Lu Zishi's hearing was tickled by her. He couldn't help but lower his head and was about to say something. However, he saw her raise her head, revealing her delicate and cute oval face. Her face was bright red, and her eyes were filled with admiration. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to call him brother again. However, his expression suddenly changed. She saw his face clearly and her tone changed. Uncle, Wei Weibai released him in shock and immediately retreated a few steps. Her face was deathly pale. I'm sorry, uncle. I mistook you for someone else. Oh, silly child. How could you mistake someone else for someone else? Didn't Mom tell you that this is your brother, Lu Zishi? Bai Ziwen rushed over and pushed Wei Weibai into Lu Zishi's arms. Xiao Bai, do you remember me? Annie Bai. This is your sister, Wei Weibai. You haven't seen her yet, right? When Bai Ziwen appeared, Lu Zishi's face had already sunk, and his eyes were as cold as ice. Oh, my sister? Bai Ziwen smiled beautifully. Of course. Do you remember Xiaowei? You met when you were little. Lu Zishi only felt that the girl in his arms was trembling in fear. She seemed unable to accept the fact that they were siblings. After all, they had just slept together. Lu Zishi recalled his mother's tragic death by jumping off a building. The corners of his lips slowly curved into a mocking sneer. His fingers passed through Wei Weibai's long hair, touched her delicate neck, and lifted it up with force. Her tightly lowered face was forced to appear in front of his eyes. Her soft eyes and childish and pure face were filled with disbelief. Lu Zishi said softly, "Hello, sister." His tone was full of malice and cold disgust. Ding, the male lead's good feelings are -20. Comma. Chapter 440. Wei Weibai watched as the favorability plummeted, climbing from -20 to -25. She took a deep look at Lu Zishi in the driver's seat. She couldn't help but say to the system, he won't drive me out into the wild to kill and dismember me, right? The system comforted her, it's okay, I've already memorized his license plate number. If you're in trouble, I'll call the police. Wei Weibai, Lu Zishi said, hello, little sister. He carried her away. Bai Ziwen, however, said excitedly, are you willing to recognize your little sister? Auntie is so happy. Lu Zishi raised his cold eyes and curled the corners of his mouth. A perfect mocking expression appeared. I recognize my little sister, but not my stepmother. Who do you think you are? After speaking, Lu Zishi instructed the waiter. He drove Bai Ziwen, who had snuck in, out of the restaurant. From beginning to end, Wei Wei Bai was like a transparent person. Lu Zishi drove back to the Lu family. When the car entered the garage, he looked in the rearview mirror, distraught. In the mirror, she wore a small white dress that exposed her shoulders. Her round shoulders were so white that they seemed to glow. A few strands of hair fell behind her ears and fell to the side of her delicate cheeks. She sat with her head down, her body tense, as if she was enduring something. As if sensing his cold gaze, she timidly raised her head. He didn't know if it was because of fear, but the corners of her eyes were red. Surprisingly good-looking. Lu Zishi hurriedly withdrew his gaze. The loathing in his heart didn't diminish in the slightest. Back then, his mother had been forced to jump off a building by Ziwen. When he closed his eyes, the scene of his mother's mangled flesh was in his mind. Lu Zishi fiercely pounded the steering wheel. She seemed frightened when he saw her in the rearview mirror. She clenched her hands in fear and looked at him in horror. Lu Zishi sneered. Only now did she know to be afraid. How could she not be afraid when she rushed up and called him Big Brother? He stopped the car, opened the door, and turned to leave. He hadn't taken a few steps when he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Then, the corner of his clothes was grabbed again. Let go. Lu Zishi's face was somewhat gloomy. Her fingers trembled, but she tightened her grip. Uncle, how old was he? Lu Zishi's eyes burned with anger, and he ignored the girl behind him. He took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and slowly took a puff. The photo of him smoking back then was so handsome that it flooded the entire entertainment industry. He slanted his eyes slightly and was about to give her a warning, but before he could say anything, Gu Nianji interrupted him. Wei Wei Bai said with a trembling voice, I won't be pregnant, right? Lu Zishi choked on his sarcastic remarks. He coughed and didn't have time to spit out the smoke. Wei Wei Bai looked at her with teary eyes. Her eyes were filled with genuine fear. I didn't take the morning after pill. Did you wear what? Lu Zishi's mind was a bit muddled. Wear what? Condoms? He immediately remembered when he woke up yesterday morning. They were lying on the bed, and because he was too anxious, he didn't pay much attention to it. But as for condoms, he didn't have any. Wei Wei Bai became anxious. Her fingers tightly grasped the corner of his clothes and said pitifully, What if I get pregnant? Lu Zishi's chest felt stuffy. He suddenly sneered, You have the guts to climb into my bed. Why didn't you even take this little precaution? Wei Wei Bai's face was deathly pale. No, I was drunk. I don't know, Lu Zishi frowned. Enough. Your mother is a slut, and you're a little slut. The man you slept with is your brother, and you're scared now. Are you worried that you'll give birth to a little retard? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.